Good morning. I call to order the regular meeting of the Oak Island Planning Board for April 20th, 2023. I'd like to note that we have two members absent, Natasha Tatum and Tim Pittman. Natasha is on her way but will be late, but we do have a quorum, and so we will proceed. If you would stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is adjustment or approval of the agenda. I know of nothing that needs to be added or deleted. Saying that, do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Gary? Second? Okay. Bob? All in favor? It is unanimous. Thank you. Next is approval of minutes. We have the February meeting and the March meeting. Does anyone have any to the February 16th meeting minutes? All right. Does anybody have any edits to the March? '16th meeting minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the February and March minutes as presented? Terry, second? Second. Bob, all in favor? It is unanimous. Thank you. Okay. Next item on the agenda is public comments. This goes much like public comments at town council meetings. You can come forward, state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us about anything you want to. If it's an agenda, if you have an item on the agenda, then we'll hear from you as we get to that agenda item.
I'm Phil Dudley, 218 Sellers Street. I wanted to speak in favor of the overlay district for the purpose of protecting vegetation. With an overlay district, it will permit more aggressive or protection in areas not beachfront and not business district. It seems that the EAC, I guess, has suggested this to you. I know it's not on the agenda today. I just want to encourage you to start getting your minds around that and what it would look like and the effectiveness of it for protecting native vegetation. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. And yes, apparently the EAC and the planning board were on parallel, but not necessarily aware of each other starting the discussion on the overlay district. We had a good discussion about that, and I think at least framed the questions that need to be asked and answered at our last planning board meeting. And we will be, that's not specifically as you stated on the agenda today, but we will be bringing that back as we move along on the amendments to the tree ordinance. So thank you. Anybody else, any other public comments? Okay. Hearing none, then we'll move on to old business. And the only item on the old business agenda is proposed text amendments to Chapter 32 of the Code of Ordinances, which is vegetation management. And these are recommendations coming to us from the Environmental Advisory Committee. And so Brady, and let me stop here. I should have said this to begin with. Matt Kirkland, our planner, is not here today because he is, his grandfather died night before last, and he is with his parents, support them in addition to his own grieving, and as I understand it, the funeral will be tomorrow.
Yes.
So our prayers are with Matt and his family. But Brady's here from the planning department, so Brady, turn it over to you.
All right. Well, good morning. For the old business, we've got the text amendment for Chapter 32 Code of Ordinance. Rick Patterson and the Environmental Advisory Committee have been working hard on this. So Rick, if you will come up and present.
Thank you. So I wanted to start off with the last sentence I had, finding the correct balance to ensure the rights of private property owners to develop their land while maintaining Oak Island's unique characteristics is challenging. These proposed text amendments are a step in the right direction, in my opinion, to preserving the island's unique oak canopy for future generations. I know you've had this in your packet. Rather than just reading it to you, maybe we could just start off with some questions, or it sounded like from earlier comments, maybe that may be the best way to proceed, if that's okay.
Rick, I think it might be helpful if you could, because it involves a whole chapter. And of course, there are two separate sections. One deals with municipal property and one deals with private property. And I wonder if you could just summarize what you think the highlights are in each one, starting with the municipal property. And how those came to be recommended.
Okay. So I think on the municipal property, of course, we are in control of that property. So, just like removing the Bradford pears based on North Carolina Division of Agriculture recommendations and replanting those with live oaks or whichever other tree species the town would decide to plant. But as of now, it's the live oaks. It's pretty straightforward to manage that. It's very easy to measure it. It's very easy to go out on our own property, on town property, and measure the diameter of those trees, label what they are, and put them on a GIS overlay and watch that over time to what happens to those trees. Now, when we get into private property, that becomes a much more of an issue of getting permission to go on someone else's property to measure trees and other things. And when we get on to so really, we do have things in the ordinance that we do try to promote to be a tree city, which we had for a long time. We do encourage planting, and we've been planting more trees all the time. And we're having a planting just on Arbor Day, just a few weeks, next week actually. And typically we do select the live oaks simply because it is Oak Island. They're a very favorable tree for this area, and they survive really well, and they're a very long-lived tree. And when we get onto the private property, I'll just go back through what I did right here, So when we started looking at this ordinance, and the ordinance I think is important because we're not only worried just about trees, but it is vegetation in general. And we talk about wild areas, we talk about natural areas, all through our ordinances. And remember, when we talk about natural areas, they're not mowed. We don't take out the dead trees in natural areas unless they're hazardous trees. So that's important to distinguish, just like in the national forest, we have wilderness areas that we leave alone and truly let nature take place, and then we have everything else. So once we start intervening, it no longer becomes a natural or wilderness area. But so the biggest thing we did, we went back through and we standardized some of the definitions and terms. So we get into heights and we get into DBHs. Well, it's more industry standard that we use DBHs. And that's the height, 4.5 foot at breast height. That's what we use for all forestry type activities. And sometimes just this week, we couldn't get trees that were 12 foot tall, but we can get them at 2-inch DBH. That's the more important thing. Actually, the trees that's a little shorter will actually transport here better than the real tall trees. So we tried to standardize some of those terms and definitions all through the ordinance. And we did try to get some consistency there. We have a lot of questions on how much are my trees worth that we leave on the lots. Right now, they're worth 1 point apiece, whether they're as big as this podium or 2 inches. So we standardize that and we put some numbers there where we give more credit for larger trees, but yet we kept it in some ranges where we can easily, staff can easily accomplish that task. And after doing a few, you can almost visually look at it and you'll be pretty close. So we tried to look at that because at the end of the day, we do still have to monitor and we do have to have staff to provide the services we're talking about and the codes enforcement. So we did start with all that, and we worked our way down. And the biggest thing we did, another big complaint that we have, the way the current ordinance is, we're always talking about we want shade. Well, crepe myrtles don't really provide shade. So we currently can use crepe myrtles as a tree, okay? So we prepared a list that was all native, that they were canopy producing trees. And now we have about 3 or 4 different reference books and probably 500 different species. So we narrowed that down to a 1-page list. And that does talk about shade trees. And then these are trees just like live oaks that will produce shade. And we have to allow those trees the spacing they require to mature to provide that shade. So many times with the way our current ordinance is written, with the sheer number that's required, those trees will never be able to mature and get to the heights and the spreads that will provide shade, which is what we say we really want. So that's what we tried to do. We tried to define those shade trees, native to North Carolina, and drought tolerant, wind tolerant, and then of course then we increased the set to the first row. Now we use a mixture more of grasses and smaller type trees. We left that and we added the second row because we're just right there. So we actually added that instead of trying to put larger trees there. And then we looked at how we calculated the credits that we have. And so the credits now, it was based on basically a 2 to 4 inch tree, you got 1 point. So what we looked at a way to increase the use of the live oaks, and now you can get double points on 2 live oaks. So we increased that to double points on 3 live oaks, and we increased, we broke out the range from a 2-inch DBH to a 4-inch DBH. We said if you go with a 3-inch DBH, then you're going to get 2 points. So if you go with a slightly larger tree that costs slightly more money, but required another year to 2 growing in the nursery, you get more points. So and we actually looked at some sites where we figured a lot of the larger homes we don't have much room left. And when we had the sheer numbers, some of these numbers are 15 to 18, 19 trees. It's just almost impossible to get that many on a lot. And we do hear the stories of folks getting a CO and then either digging the trees up and removing them or cutting them down. And so we know we got some issues that we do need to address. So that's what we tried to do all through the manual here. By reducing the recommended trees and combining the 2 tables, you can easily look into the ordinance now and see, here's a table that shows existing tree credit. Next table, exactly identical, shows how much you get for new seedlings, for new trees, not seedlings, new trees that you're planting. So that it's much easier to attain that information. Also, reducing the number of trees that's available to be planted into those native, North Carolina native species, it allows our local nurseries to better stock the materials that we're going to use rather than it's easier to stock 20 different varieties rather than 500. So that's what we also get into. The other probably real big change is so what do we do to help clear cut, stop the clear cutting? So as most of us know, a lot of the lots are field. Okay, so we have been trying to enforce the field ordinance and get a better handle on making sure we know what's going to get filled and what's not. So if they fill a lot and they have to leave a lot of trees, they'll fill the dirt all the way up around them, or they'll build a well around them. Because if we stack that dirt up against those trees, it'll kill the trees, but it'll be a nice slow death, okay? So so those two go hand in hand. So when you look at these lots, a lot of them you'll see they'll clear cut, they'll come in and fill, then they'll plant. So it makes it much easier on that building aspect. So what do we try to do to get that? So some of the lots don't have trees already, okay? And what happens too, if we're not careful, is we will get ourselves into a situation, in my opinion, where one person will get a permit and clear the lot, and then we'll wait 6 months, and then another person will get the permit to build the house. So they don't have to, we gotta be real careful, or they'll be able to sidestep those permits. So with that being said, so what we're leaving now, we use those, we added some additional numbers. They have to be at least a 5-inch DBH tree. And when you walked in today, the new trees we just planted in front, those are 5-inch DBH trees. They're 25 foot tall, okay? So you have to leave a tree at least 5-inch DBH, and it can be any native tree, and then you'll get 1 to 2 points for that. And then as you get bigger, you'll get more points. So if you leave up to, I'm pulling it up here, up to a maximum, I think, of 3 points per tree. So on a lot of so when we start looking at this out in the field, a lot of leaving 3 or 4 large oak trees or large trees will just about get you all your points. So then you don't have to plant 19 trees. But at the same time, the trees that you're leaving are substantial enough that they will mature out and you will get some shade in there. Let me find that here. Those existing trees now, you'll see where you'll drive by and you'll see a little clump, and there'll be 10 trees there. And a lot of them will be just 2 inches, okay? These trees have to be spaced at least 20 foot apart to get a credit. So if you get a group like that, you're probably gonna get one to 2 credits is all you'll get for that, for the size of those trees. So they can still leave the trees there, but we'll only credit those bigger trees. That will allow those trees to get a mature height to them and actually be healthy and live. The other thing we're doing, we're looking at how we're doing code enforcement on this. So I think what's projected here for the future, the near future, is still have zoning taking a look at those. And, you know, we get a form that shows what you're going to leave and what you're going to cut. And then what really happens. That's when we drive by and the tree's all skinned up, they got equipment parked up against it, all these things. So at the end of the day, no matter what you said you're going to do, we're going to come back out and look at what you did do. So if you killed all the trees you left, we're going to start your credits, you'll start back at 0 again. So we're going to have sort of a double enforcement on that, where we're looking at that 2 different times, in the planning stage and then at the final stage. So hopefully that will adjust that. But most of the ones I look at with larger trees, and especially if we get into these bigger trees, you can rack up some points pretty quickly. Then that way, that allows the homeowner to then plant other trees that they might want to plant, like a palm tree. I don't really have anything wrong with palm trees, but they don't normally produce too much shade, but I do like them though. So it kind of accomplishes 2 goals. We get the shade we're wanting, but yet it allows the homeowner some more flexibility to have some land left that they can actually plant something that they really would like to have. So everything else has stayed the same. So what happens when we do this and we're coming up short on our trees? So what we proposed here is to set up an additional, and it would be a tree preservation fee for all lots. Those all lots, or whether they're cleared, whether they're on the ocean front, wherever they're at, of $300. Or, well, and council, so I'll yield on what all the fees should be, but we did talk about a fee, and I'll have to yield on what that fee will be, but I was sort of thinking around $300. Okay, so then we go in and you save all the trees, you save all your trees, then that's all that you pay. You'll pay, let me get back to the point here. Yeah, so then that fee will be reduced by half. So you'll pay the $150 that you're typically paying today. Okay, so let's say you don't save all your trees. So if you save all your trees, you get your fees half price. So it's $150 rather than $300. And then let's say that you don't get all your trees. And then again, I will yield on the actual amount, but what we're talking about was what the committee also suggested was $500 per tree that you're short. So if you're short all 10 trees, it'll be several dollars for you. So it gives you an incentive, I would hope, to save more trees. And what happens to those funds? So those funds would then be used for tree plantings on our public land. So that would be also a way to self-sustain some tree planting activities into the future, where we talked about just like down through East Oak Island Drive here and all the way down through the island and our parks. Those tables I was talking about on the existing and new tree planting, those are on page 15 of your handout. And of course, we did go through and tried to correct any grammar errors that we found in all through the ordinance. I think that's all I have, unless you had some questions.
And Rick, I thank you for the summary of the high spots. I have one general question, and then what I'd like for us to do, if we could, to just go page by page and allow any of the board members to ask any questions that they might have. I like to do things systematically.
Agreed.
And I see people shaking their heads, yeah, so we'll start with that. But my general question to begin with is, throughout this process, did you or the subcommittee look at what's in our UDO, Article 10 on the performance standards for landscape requirements? Now, I know a lot of that applies to commercial multifamily, but there also seem to be some things in that ordinance that would speak to town property as well. There's certainly a plant list there that's separate from the plant list referenced in our existing ordinance or in the proposed amendment. And there's also an appendix about how to install the trees and protect the trees and that sort of thing is in the UDO. Have you tried to compare or consider or think about how what's proposed here, particularly for the public section,
Yeah, those are great questions.
dovetails with what's in the UDO for performance standards in Article 10?
Yes, ma'am. So yes, I do think those need to be consistent. I think that to go to the one list would still work very well here for commercial properties as well as the private. So that would be a fairly easy fix in there. I have looked at a good bit of the parking islands and some of those. And again, the same trees would work extremely well in the same species we're talking about. It would just be a little more opened up for the commercial industry or the commercial areas, I would think. But I do think that would need to be consistent.
Brady, if you could make a note to, that as we move along in this process, we need to check for the consistency with
And that would also be the
The
place that
landscape requirements in our UDO in Article 10.
the two tables would also fit into that very nicely.
Okay, so the ordinance starts on page 19. Of course, the first article is just the authority piece. Article 2 is entitled Tree Management Program, only applies to town-owned or controlled property, which would include anything we own, public right-of-ways, the land this building is sitting on. And so it starts out then on, and I think it's important to keep in mind, the next few pages apply to public property. Okay. And so on page 20, there's a start of some definitions, and I'm just going to start on one end and go down, get y'all's questions and feedback, and then I'll add mine, and then we'll go to the next page. That suit everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay, so David?
I'm good on this section.
Gary?
No comments on page 20.
I don't have
Gary?
any comments on the definitions. No comments on the definitions.
Bob?
Maybe this is a question, and whether it should be a question later or not, you can direct me, but we talk about the DBH, right, diameter at breast height. And so you could have 4 inches or whatever it is to use as an example. But that doesn't speak to how tall the tree is. And so in a sense, and I'm not a tree expert, which you can probably see that quickly, but in a sense, you could have a short stubby tree that is 4 inches at breast height, but only gets 6 feet tall. And another tree with 4 inches at breast height might be 15 feet tall. There's a huge difference between those, I would imagine. And should we not have a requirement to have a height as well, not just DBH as another metric? If this is like, crazy or irrelevant, feel free to tell me so.
So I think what you're saying is possible. I don't think it's quite that, most of the time it's not quite that much of a difference. The industry standard is DBH.
Right.
So, there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, of having a tree that's a little different shape or form than the other tree. And many times those become the more interesting trees that we look at. So I think that trying to have 2 variables that we're looking at for regulations, we can simplify that to 1, the DBH, the more industry standard, and make the whole thing a little simpler with
Okay.
not really mixed results. Because what we're really looking at, it doesn't make the tree live any longer if it's taller or get it established when we're planting a new tree. But what does give it a better chance of starting is a larger root system and a more developed tree, which we get when we get a larger DBH.
Right, I guess what I'm thinking of is a big difference between a live oak that's giving a big canopy and a short palm tree that might be the width, but not very tall and not much shade and more, and probably less expensive than I don't consider a palm tree giving us a tree canopy. And that's what we always talk about, is a tree canopy.
And we had that discussion when we did the revisions a couple of years ago and decided, and so that's why we excluded palm trees from counting for anything.
Right, well, and that could be why, that could be another way that we achieve the height, is by asking for the right species of trees, because those species grow to the right height, and as Madam Chair just said, we discounted those palm trees. So anyway, that's my general comment on definitions so far. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, as you will come to no surprise, I have several questions, comments. While putting the DVH separately is fine, and I realize the difference between caliper and for nursery stock and DBH for measuring existing trees, Our caliper, and just point out that our caliper definition, which DBH is a caliper measurement for diameter of a tree, specifically, although it doesn't call it DBH, it specifically says it's taken at breast height or 4.5 feet above the ground. So the two definitions are saying the same thing, and it also addresses what happens in splits and forks and that kind of thing. We could certainly look at splitting out caliper from a nursery measurement. Of course, nursery measurements are typically taken 12 inches above or at the base of the nursery stock, and we're trying to get nursery stock that has something that's at 4.5 feet rather than the smaller, is what our objective was in the last revision.
Right, so typically, it depends whether you're buying stuff bare rooted or if you're buying it already potted. If it's already potted, it's usually by the container size. And when we get into the other, like the grasses and stuff, I do recommend some larger containers, okay? So if you're buying them bare rooted, you'll still get a DBH measurement. So that is really the true, or the container. That is the two most common ways of purchasing.
Well, I think it's important in any update of our definitions that we make that distinction clear and say specifically what we want to see from whatever nursery stock for any additional new trees that have to be planted.
And I think we've achieved that by all through we may have a definition of caliper here, but we never talk about caliper again. Everything's back to DBH
Well,
and container size.
And the large tree, small tree distinction is also a distinction that's in the UDO under the landscape requirements, but and I would want between the two in terms of determining the height, the typical maturity height, those to be matched the same. That would be one thing in looking at that, having the same standards across anything to do with trees. But beyond that, I think that, you know, one of the key things that we've, at least one of my key takeaways from our UDO audit was that we shouldn't be mixing definitions and requirements. So, for example, you know, define what large tree is in the first sentence, and talking about the DBH, you know, plan to meet planning requirements for new construction except oceanfront and second row lots. Well, that needs to be somewhere else if that's what we're going to do. So I think mixing regulations and definitions would be something else that we need to look at. That also seems to happen in the small trees, and I'm assuming that you struck the definition of tree because you made the distinction between small tree and large tree. But again, in terms of determining some kind of height, as Bob was referring to, and perhaps considering, I know one of the
So the heights that I'm talking about are mature heights.
right, and we're
And we
looking
did
at
get
some,
that, yeah.
we're looking at the 12 as not being a mature height, looking at the nursery stock and that kind of thing, or a tree that may be existing that, you know, hasn't been there for 100 years, so it still has growing to do. As you alluded to, you know, when you're separation of trees and that type of thing.
And that's where the DBH would come in on the existing trees.
Yeah. And in the specimen tree, in eliminating those distinctions, what does that do to our pine trees?
Shouldn't do anything with them as long as they're a 5-inch DBH. And that would only really apply, well, I think on our tree list, we don't have any of the pines listed, but I'd have to double check that, but that goes back to the 5-inch. So we're saying a tree, anything lower than a 5-inch on existing trees, regardless of species, really doesn't count. That's a specimen tree for our ordinances to get credit.
Well, and again, we might change the DBH measurement, but of course, that referred, the 5 DBH for pines referred to southern pines. But and if we're gonna use hardwood and softwood, then it seems like we'd need definitions for those as well. And so those are my comments and questions on page 20. Page 21.
Madam Chair, is there a way that for public and for the audience, they could be seeing what we're seeing in our packet in terms of the actual language and wording that we are reviewing? Is there a way for us to show that, Madam Clerk?
Yes, I just have to get, excuse me, Mike to switch the,
Okay.
I mean, not, if it's too much trouble,
no,
don't.
it's not any trouble at all.
I just thought it would be
Plug my
helpful
cord in and bring something up.
for people to see what we're looking at and what we're discussing.
I think I have it saved.
We're waiting, I will say that, so when we, in the examples I give for the different cities like Savannah, Southport, you know, we have a lot of terms there, historical tree, a specimen tree, tree of distinction, just depends on what part of the country you're in, what they call that. So that's one reason we don't really have that here. We don't have anything that says that a 30-inch or 6-foot diameter live oak is a historical tree. We don't have that. So the only thing that we're quoting in our ordinances is a 5-inch tree. So that's what we're calling that, the specimen tree. So as we progress, I do feel that'll probably come around sooner or later that we will designate a certain size tree, which you can see which those other ordinance did do.
I think that would be something that'd be appropriate when we get to talking about the overlay zone as landmark trees. And have specifications in place for when you can't and can't cut those trees regardless of whether it's developed or undeveloped property. But that's for a later time. On page 21, I'll just make the rounds again. David?
No comment.
Gary?
On section 32-33, this, it indicates the town manager or his designee shall perform. Would it be helpful that that actually inserts who the specific town staff responsible would be? Is that you, Rick, or is that development staff generally?
Me and Matt had that conversation, and Matt's recommendation was we leave it or their designation. That way it doesn't lock the town manager or the town into who they could designate that responsibility to.
Yeah, that's why we've always tried to make those general, because it can change depending on staff changes and so forth.
I understand. My point is that it should be someone with the expertise to know what they are, what they're making sure we adhere in terms of compliance. And if it's someone that does not have that expertise, would we not be concerned? That's my point. It should be someone that is fully understanding of trees, horticulture, vegetation, those types of things. That's my only point with it.
Well, and I appreciate that, Carrie, and that would be adding something we need to consider and talk with our planning staff about what would constitute the proper verbiage for some qualifications or some certificates and so forth. Okay. And yeah, that occurs in several places throughout the ordinance, so whatever we do for one, we do for all of it.
And we do reference the forester through other sections here.
Okay.
The only addition I would make is if, for example, a position were vacant for 4 months, you wouldn't want
Somebody,
nobody designated to be able to do something.
Exactly, that too. Thank you, Lisa.
right. Anything else, Terry?
So I'd just like to echo what my colleague said about having someone qualified. It raises a question that's not specific to this page, but to the town in general. And maybe, Rick, you can clarify things for me and for the general public. You're listed as the town forester. Are you an arborist, and what is the difference?
I'm a licensed professional horticulturalist also.
Okay, what is the difference between the definition of a forester or the qualification of a forester and an arborist?
So many towns will have an urban forester in more urban areas like this. And most of the time on those, you'll look, horticulturists would have more education than arborist. For my certification, it's years of experience through the national, through the American Society of Horticultural Sciences. You had to have a 4-year degree plus so many years of experience.
Okay, so then you would be qualified to go out and evaluate the health of a tree.
Absolutely.
Great, that's good to know.
As well as pruning them and how to grow them.
Great, I appreciate that clarification. That's all I have on that page.
Bob?
Nothing, thank you.
Yes, and so my concern is taking out the arboricultural and replacing it with horticulture science. No disrespect to you and your degrees, but everything, you know, I think, I don't know how much of the ordinance y'all were able to read through from the forestry grant that was in our packets, either last month or a month before last. And some of the types of things in terms of qualifications and certifications are clarified in that. We may go back to it. But my understanding of horticulture has always been dealing more with fruits and vegetables and ornamental plants. And arboriculture dealing more specifically with trees and forestry. And if you look at the Tree City USA documents and the ANSI standards that when they talk about those are referenced and approved by, I think it's the International Society of Arboriculture. And so I'd like to maintain the same references to that we have in our Tree City USA documents. Okay, on page 22, the only thing there is tree and landscape appraiser's guide, and if you just say as amended, then you'll be able to keep up the current references to that. And we have that in some other areas in our codes too. But are there any questions about anything on 22? Anybody? I did have one question, and that was the reference here. And again, some of these references, because this code has been changed so many times, piecemeal, could just be carryovers and conflicts that weren't caught. But the reference here on page 22 at the top about values of public trees, and then in the definitions, which was not a definition that you recommend making any changes to, but on page 20, we have a reference to the guide for plant appraisal by the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers. You could assume that that's one and the same thing, but however, whatever it is that we are actually referring to, I think it would be the same in both places.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing you. I'm having a hard time following. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Well, like I said, the definition for tree value on page 20 has a reference to use to determine that, and that's worded differently from the reference used to determine the values on page 22. And whichever one is right, or if they're one and the same, they need to have the same reference.
And so we're talking about the appraisal, the 9th edition, is that what we're talking about there?
Yes, and then
So-
there's,
So typically, that's used, we didn't,
I understand that, Rick, but what I'm saying is the definition that we have on page 20, not from you, but it's already there. I mean, these already conflicted. I'm just trying to also, while we're at this, point out some things that you may not have addressed that still would be good to clean up while we're at this. See the difference between the wording and the reference and the definition at the bottom of page 20 and the wording in the paragraph on the values of the trees. I just wanted to point out that they're different. Now, the next page from 22, and of course, the last thing on 22 talks about approved tree lists. And this is approved tree list for applications on municipal property. And so that list appears on page, a table appears on page 23. Previously, the ordinance had just said that we have a list, and we've got several of them that we've had for a number of years, and they're referenced in the Land Use Development Code previously. There are some referenced in the UDO and the landscape. I mean, we have Tree City USA, and I'm not sure whether it was when that committee was separate or when after the EAC was formed. We've had specific books lists published by them. So there's a lot out there. This attempts to make just one list. and follows the small tree, large tree, shrubs, grasses, that sort of thing. And so there are questions or comments on this? Yeah.
Rick,
Yes, sir.
the current list we are working under the current ordinance, did we change that list to this list here?
Yes. So
Nothing's been
there was,
changed
I
yet.
think, 3 or 4 different references.
Yeah,
As the chair mentioned, and we tried to take those references and then put them into some of those, when they list native species, it's all the way from Massachusetts to Texas.
Yeah.
So we tried to condense that down to North Carolina, and then we tried to look at the designations we got as drought tolerant, native, and salt tolerant.
okay.
So that's.
Question. We do have graces listed on this and palmetto palms. If that is planted under the current regulations, that will count, correct?
Only in the first row,
Okay,
only in the first row.
that's not, I do not see where that's distinguished.
Not here, but back before it talked about that the list only, it would, except for the first and second row, we tried to add the second row to that. So I think we'll see that. I'll see if I can find it in there exactly.
Well, and I will say, because I noticed the same thing, David, I will say that if you don't have that distinguished in 2 separate tables, you're going to not get what you want.
Exactly. There needs to be some distinction for those as front row only, to where it's not blended with the others.
That's correct. That's correct. I'm trying to find, I think we haven't got to that yet.
Can I expand on that while I've got the table? We talked about an overlay type district. In certain parts of the island, there is vacant of actual live oaks, the type of trees that we're trying to plant. It's mainly sandy, arid environment. And we're trying to create a forest type environment on that side of the island. Why can we not extend the first and second row back to the third row where it makes sense as a special overlay district?
And that's certainly something to add to that
Yes,
overlay consideration, as being not just one overlay for everything, but different overlays for different areas.
Yes.
Depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
depending on the type of environment that area of the island has.
That's a good point, David. Anything else on the table or related?
Yeah.
I think it does in section 32-36 reference just that this table is applicable just to municipal property. So I'm assuming it also applies to private as well.
Well, I think that would be, I think that needs to be adjusted there to say in private property.
Okay.
Well,
That's what I thought.
Yeah, we're in
Okay.
the section on public property, and we
And so
need
to my
have
point,
something.
does this table need to be moved outside to a definition or something like that, since it applies theoretically to both public and private property? Maybe it's not in the right place, is what I'm saying, right?
Need to yield to Matt on that and Brady on that to see where it
Okay.
would be better placed.
That would be my question. Also, would these same materials apply appropriately both on the island and the mainland? Is there some differences from a mainland perspective within town limits?
Yeah, so on the list, I think there does need to be a note that the shrubs and grasses only applies to first and second, or first, second, and third, whatever you choose there. I think these can be used on the mainland. I think there's other species there, where we were looking at survivability here on the island, especially with the salt spray. That's why most all these have got the salt tolerance. I think the list could be larger as we moved inland. I think that list could be larger and still be successful in planning.
Okay, just a suggestion for future thinking in terms of this table, that would be good to have. And it might make sense if we move the table to some generic spot within the statute, maybe just add a column that says whether it's, you know, location-wise, where it's applicable for the island, whether it's first, second row, anywhere else on the island. You could just add a column to this table indicating its best location, if you will. Just a suggestion.
But there definitely needs to be some clarification there, yeah, is what you're saying, and I agree. Terry?
I don't have anything additional to that.
Tom?
Thanks.
And much of what has been said was also, what I was gonna say is mostly been said, but I also had the thought that, in looking at the trees we're saving, existing trees, so how many of these, I mean, are there trees that are existing that are native, that are growing here, that people would love to save and not see cut down, that aren't on this list?
We don't use this list on trees
I
that's
understand that,
existing.
but that's not I understand that. But are we, and the reason why I say that is if there are trees that are existing that are thriving and surviving already and they're not on this list, then if they're available in nursery stock and they have proven that they can thrive and survive, why aren't they on this list? You see
Because
my
that
point?
list would be just where we're at now. It would encompass so many plants that a typical homeowner or even a contractor has a hard time figuring out what they really need to plant. And then the nursery, we're right back to that point. It's easier for that nursery to maintain a good supply of live oaks or big nut hickories or whatever's on this list rather than, so that was the whole reasoning behind there. And the nurseries, the local nurseries, we use several up in Ash, they both agree that that would also help their operations,
Well,
be able to supply the
And what I
materials.
don't want to see is people looking at trees that, table credits or not, trees that on their lot and see that they're not on this list, even though they're existing, and say, well, that's not even on the list, so I'm gonna cut it anyway, and replace it with a tree that's on the list or something. There's all kind of things that can happen with that, and I wanna make,
And I do think some educational activities by us could help, help alleviate that.
yeah. Okay. Next, on page 24, again, we run into who's doing what kinds of issues with the designee and whether we've got foresters or public works directors doing something, or if they're working in conjunction with each other. And then I think the two asterisks at the top deal with the table. But again, that's giving, that needs to be somewhere where we're talking about giving credits in the ordinance pieces. But I also, Carrie, to your point about whether this should be in the private or public or both, or how that works, I think, because it only, I think if we're going to, that we need to set the standard for what the town is, but if we don't have a standard list for the town to demonstrate, then, set the example. And so, I would want to have the same for both.
Agreed.
But I think there is some more discussion that can be had in terms of all of the designations of who's doing what. And that's mostly what appears on page 24, if y'all agree that that's, or if you have anything else to say about that.
On 32.39, sorry, I even jump in here, but I've always said, and I had the honor and the pleasure of serving on the Environmental Advisory Committee, and I've always said that I feel like part of the issue with our tree preservation approach and culture is that we don't do enough public awareness and public education. And so a comment would be that I hope that we can move forward with educating the public who move here, who live here, develop property here, as to the value of our tree canopy, and that be more encouraged and invested in from a town and citizen perspective.
Yeah, Carrie, I agree. And looking back on this and the Tree City Growth Award, we've had the Tree City USA Award for 25 years, I think, or something to that effect. But there is another, and those are really some very bare minimum requirements in order to qualify for that. It's better than nothing, but it's something. But then there is another set of requirements for the Tree City USA Growth Award, which is very different, and I think goes more in the direction of what you were speaking to, and even some things that we might look at in terms of how to support that on an ordinance level. And I would really like for the EAC or somebody, Tree Piece, you guys, somebody look at that growth award for Tree City and provide us with some input about how we can support that in the ordinance as well. I know there's lists.
Well, the biggest
By
thing we got to do is
states.
plant some trees.
Well, there are several things in that growth award that qualify for that. I know Wilmington's received that on an annual basis, and of course, once you get it, then you have to do more the next time to get it, and keep up what you've got and continue. That's why it's called a growth award. But I'd really like to see us delve into more with that in terms of how we could support that with an ordinance. Okay, on page 25, again, we've got some references that have been addressed on other pages. And there may be some things with the hazardous tree. I noticed that every owner of any tree, I guess that's its intersection with public property, which is why it's in this section. But again, we have, whatever we come up with in terms of who does what as being consistent throughout. And if there are reasons why they're different from place to place, then we need to understand what that is. But I will look to Matt to give us some feedback on that as well.
So, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but this is under Article 2, relative to public property, but does this not also apply to private property?
Well, in other words, the way the ordinance is worded, it says it applies to municipal property only. And so, again, that's something that we need to get clarified and put language in if we need to have the same language in the third article, make more clear of what applies to what. But yeah, from an ordinance perspective and language, this applies to municipal property, period. And so if we want to see some of those things, if they aren't already in Article 3, then we need to.
I guess I read it differently. I see
that.
it talks about overhanging streets or sidewalks, clearly that are it's town property. But it also talks about trees falling across multiple properties due to inclement weather. That seems very much related to private property stipulation, if I'm reading it right. Maybe I'm,
I think there's a,
And we may have
excuse me, I
some
think there's a
hazardous.
distinction between the, in other words, after a storm, if there's a tree that's
Right.
lying across, if there's a tree that's presenting a real public danger, I think this might give the town the ability to go in and take
Okay.
care of that.
okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's
Thank you.
the run-of-the-mill, day-to-day kind of things that you might
Okay.
think about. But still, we want to make sure that we've got.
If that's the case, to Lisa's point, then I'd like to see it modified in some way to be more clear, because I'm reading about public property, and now all of a sudden I'm talking about private property.
Right.
And it's very confusing, and one of our goals is to make everything that
Make
we
it
do
not.
more simple and
Yes.
understandable and easy
Yes.
to.
Yes.
Yeah, so this
I think this whole section needs
Yeah,
work.
32-40-1 is confusing at best.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, we need to look at that whole section. Bob?
Nothing on, well, I guess I will say something. So this originally came in December, this tree proposal. We've been talking about tree proposals and tree improvements and tree recommendations pretty much every year that I've been here. This is my third and final year. And so I think that they came in December, and Rick unfortunately was sick and couldn't make it that day. And here it is, April, almost May. This is clearly getting, in my opinion, the slow roll. Right? And I think that what we have here is a case of the great is the enemy of the good. And so when we get done with this, I'm going to make a motion to approve. And we'll keep improving it later, okay? Because I don't want to see this get delayed another 6 months before we actually take action. In the front of this document, that says that it's recommended for approval. So do I. Let's carry on.
Rick, what was the change in the fee citation? In the middle of the page? From $50 to $100?
That was a correct, that was a suggestion by Matt that
Okay,
I think that was, I'd have to yield to him while we reduced that from 100 to 50, but that was
okay,
his recommendation on that.
all right. And there's nothing on page 26. And the middle of 26 starts the vegetation management program. And the vegetation management program kind of refers broadly to the community. But again, some of those references about specifying what applies to what property. And so we pick up on 27, again with some more definitions.
Seems to me that these were good clarifications. Just want to comment.
Anybody else have any comments on this page?
Am I overlooking the number of tree credits for a specimen tree that is left?
Down 27?
27.
That was back on the definition of
Okay.
specimen tree
Okay,
for existing hardwood and softwood trees with a minimum DBH of 5 inches.
Are we on 28 now? Have we moved on?
Yeah, 28. You're talking about specimen tree, David?
correct.
Yeah, see, that was the same change to specimen tree that we talked about in the previous section.
Is the intent trying to say tree credits are applied for existing hardwood and softwood species? It seems like just maybe a wording change there might make it a little clearer. Is that what we're trying to communicate?
Yes, that's what we was trying to communicate.
Tree, so instead of saying for the purpose of, you'd say tree credits are applied for existing hardwood and softwood. That's what you're trying to communicate, right?
Yeah, and when we were doing this, we didn't try to take, we just tried to take what was there. And make the
Understood.
correction. Some of the duplications had already been there previously. But yeah, that's what we're trying to say.
Okay,
Make it clear, 5 inches to get credit for an existing tree in a new construction.
thank you.
Well, and again, it's, before it said what was, the piece that was left out, for the purpose of this article, is how it actually reads in the ordinance now. And that avoids mixing things about credits with, you're just defining what you say a specimen tree is, rather than trying to mix regulations with definitions.
Well, and I agree, if you're gonna leave that in there, at least needs to be reworded.
Right.
Yeah,
Because the definition should be about the specimen tree, not the credits.
not the credits. And then we have, town foresters talking about, again, there's conflicts, multiple references to who does what. If this is going to be, particularly this section, which is related to development, is our UDO administrator going to, see to it that it's administered properly? That's not something that's brought up in the recommended changes, but and so, for this, and it talks about the whole, this references chapter where everything else reference articles. So, again, we run into conflicts of who's supposed to be doing what.
The other thing, Madam Chair, I point out on 28 is the definition of tree value, again, a reference to the guide, so that
Right.
anywhere that it's referenced, it reads the same way.
Yep. Consistency throughout. And I think that, again, the last sentence on the vegetation plan, although that may be what needs to be done in terms of administration, that needs to be separated from the definition. On 29,
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, 1 second. Back on 32-74 on page 28. So where does a lot clearing permit come in? Is that under a grading permit? Is it from a practical standpoint, or is that saying the same thing? A permit to clear a lot is the same as a grading permit? I'm asking because I just don't know.
It is.
Okay.
well, typically it's, a lot of times it's done at the same time, but then you can still go in and bush hog without a permit. And of course, bush hogging, the definition refers to the clearing prior to grading. So you don't have to get a permit to bush hog.
But you do have to get one to clear, to what we could all define as clearing a lot.
Yeah, to grade it. To actually disturb the soil would be a required permit.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Activities that would not disturb the soil would not
Got it.
require
That's
that.
helpful. Thank you, Rick.
That's a good distinction, yeah. Okay, we're ready to go on? Page 29 has no, has no recommended changes, but I noticed in B at the very top, we're talking about existing structure does not involve a material increase in impervious surface. That's another one of those interpretive things that probably should be in terms of requiring a landscape plan, or what should actually be termed as a vegetation plan, I think. So on page 30,
Yeah, here's where I can see a conflict coming up. On CBC says existing trees, minimum of 20 feet apart, protected from damage during construction, get that. But when we go into X number of trees per 1,600 square feet, how are we going to maintain the distance apart to get healthy trees if there's not adequate room after the house is put in?
And that's where we're at now. That's exactly where we're at right now. So the 20-foot is existing trees. So the 20-foot would get credit for existing trees spaced 20 foot apart to get any credit. And then, once we got the credits for that, that's where the landscaper or whoever's doing that design would come in, and then they would place the other trees around that, just like any good designer would do. So if we left two nice live oaks in that front setback area, we know that on a 60-foot lot, those two trees are the canopy's gonna be touching, so we'd have to actually plant probably no more right there. That's covered, they'd have to put the planting more toward the back and the sides of the houses, if that's.
I totally understand that, but here's the question. If you have to save 2 trees per every 1,600 square feet, is what it's reading.
1450.
Oh, no, with,
Can I ask a real quick question? I'm so sorry. But when I was putting this into the agenda packet, Mr. Patterson, so I looked at this section and it had the language for existing trees intended to meet tree requirements. It had that language. But the part that's crossed out was just not even in the ordinance document. That's currently in the ordinance, and our typical method of preparing and presenting ordinance amendments would be to show that as a strike-through. So I want to make sure that that is the intention, that the lots devoid of trees or do not meet the required number of trees to be saved, that is a strike-through to be replaced with this other paragraph.
My pages are not marked, they're not numbered the same as yours.
Okay.
So make sure where we're at here, make sure which one, are we on
Yeah, which
letter?
Which item? C.
for C?
3276.
Yeah.
I was asking about E.
As in Edward.
Okay.
E as in Edward.
E, yeah, E is in every.
There were a couple numbering issues, so I took the ordinance and what was offered as amendments and compared them and made put them in the proper number.
I'm just gonna read and make sure existing trees intended to meet tree requirements shall be spaced a minimum of 20 foot apart and protected from damage during the construction process. The existing tree credit calculation table shall apply to new development sites.
Yes, and the only reason I ask is that to replace the existing language is that the existing language was specific to lots devoid of trees, whereas what it's replacing that is applicable to all lots.
yeah.
I just wanna make sure that was correct.
Trees, they're not gonna have any existing trees on.
Well, I just want to make sure that was for the record.
I think that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I don't understand why I'd strike lots, any reference to or what you're gonna do with lots devoid of trees.
So going forward, lots devoid of trees will not get credits because there's no trees there. So that would entail replanting trees on lots that do not have trees currently.
Yes,
Yeah,
just as we do
which is
today.
Yeah.
what it already requires, right?
Yeah.
But where does that?
Yeah, where does it say
Where
that?
does that say that in the new?
An F, right? Is that where we're talking about now, about an F?
I think
Oh,
I think
E,
we've
E is
lost,
in every.
yeah, we've lost the language about lots devoid of trees in the way, the current.
Correct. The proposed.
But I think aren't we all saying we still need some stipulation about lots devoid of trees? Yes?
So you could keep that language and make it E, and then make the existing trees intended to meet the tree requirements could be F,
F.
and then everybody changed underneath it.
Yes, yes, that's right, Lisa.
That's what I wanted to make sure you wanted to do.
So we come back to the point, if we keep that language in there, then we're going to have a crowded lot with trees, because we're going to have to use a calculation based on 1,460 square feet. For every 1,460 square feet, you're going to have put 2 trees.
Correct.
Okay, once you put the house on there,
Credits, 2 tree credits.
you have to put 2 tree credits.
Credits.
There's where you come up with the overabundance of trees that's required for that one particular lot.
Which, David, you need to look at.
We
for
need to
those
look
lots,
at
a
that
difference in-
calculation
difference
and
in-
drop it back, because,
Because you
there-
have nothing to start with to get more credits for existing trees,
yeah,
is what you're saying.
yeah,
But and so we don't have something that addresses
don't.
that here, but.
Correct.
we-
So to
we
overcome
need
that, we allowed more credit, more tree credits for slightly larger, desirable, most desired trees here on Oak Island, which were live oaks. That's how we overcame that. Instead of reducing that overall number of tree credits, we give more credit for larger diameter and Pacific trees.
okay, that's in the, chart
And
coming
we'll be getting
up.
to that just shortly.
Okay,
So instead, yeah,
The existing versus the,
yeah, and that was already existing, yeah.
any other questions, David?
no.
Karen?
I think there is a reference in B to 2-inch caliper, and I thought you wanted to be standardized on DBH throughout the
It's the same thing.
statute.
Well,
Yep.
and
Is that
again,
the same?
2-inch caliper, the way we have caliper defined. it
That was
defines
already, I
caliper
thought
as
that was already
DBH.
existing from what you guys had.
I'm just asking if you wanted to be consistent about DBH through, is all I'm saying, just
Oh, okay,
semantics.
yeah, I got you. So I
As
think
opposed
that's
to
the way y'all had
caliper,
already wrote that, so we can
whatever,
sure mark that, yeah.
Just a comment.
Yes, yes, I got you.
Oh, one more thing. Are we instituting a tree fee now on the new language that was not in previous?
Yes.
And how exactly is that going to be calculated?
It'll be a straight fee. Let's just say it's $300. Then if you are able to save the existing trees that you have to meet your credits, then that would be cut in half. So it'd be down to, say, $150, which is much what the grading permit is now. Okay, then if you are not able to meet your tree credits, then it would be basically a fee of $500 per tree credit that you're short.
So lots devoid of trees to begin with are still going to be charged how much total? Is that based on,
$500 a tree, period. So if your lot's devoid to
Yeah.
start with, you'll pay the full amount of credits based on 2 per 1,450 square feet.
so that's going to be nearly $3,000
Correct,
on top of the other fees that's being charged.
correct. And I will yield on the fee, whatever the fees need to be, but, and I think I could expressed, the committee wanted to make sure that we're serious. We're serious and we're giving you, because we talked about all kinds of numbers. And it's hard to set a number that's really going to affect, most of these are contractor-owned properties. They build the house, then they sell it. So all this is done during that construction phase before the true owner ever gets involved. So we wanted to just make sure that what is that number? Is it 500 or is it 5,000? That's where we had a lot of discussion about that. We wanted it to sting a little bit, but not, put you out of business. So I don't know exactly what that number should be, but that's the number that they, at the end of the day, they seem to agree that could be a start to work.
So just to clarify, if someone buys a lot that has maybe 1 or 2 trees on it, it's in the dead center, they have to cut those down. At the end of the day, if they do not come up with appropriate tree credits that's required, they'll pay $500 per tree.
Per credit that they're devoid in, that's correct.
So if they choose not to put any trees back and they needed 15 trees to justify, that would be $3,000 that they could pay and we would be done.
No, they still have to replace the 15 trees.
They still have to pay and then pay the fee on top
That's
of
right.
buying the trees.
That's correct.
So they're going to pay an additional $15,000 in just trees and then pay another $3,000 on top of that for a tree fee.
Correct.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
No, that's.
It doesn't, and also, that doesn't seem to be what this is saying, but this is incredibly confusing to me.
Well, and the issue I have with it is, we're not really ever penalizing the builders or the developers. If they're building a private home for someone, it's just gonna be a pass-through cost. They're gonna send it right on to the homeowner. If they're building a spec home, they're just gonna tack it on to the price of the house. So, we've gotta have some way to get their attention, but they're not gonna pay any attention to this. They're just gonna pass it right through.
These are not my numbers, so,
Well,
yeah.
and I'll
But
be honest.
that's correct.
I
I mean, that's
don't know
what
what
makes it
the-
so complicated.
I don't know what the answer is, but we're not gonna harm builders in any way. We're not gonna get their attention that way.
Right. And I do think that was the goal, was to get their attention, to give them some kind of incentive not to clear all the lots, to make it easier to fill or just easier to build.
The effort is to encourage saving trees and putting more trees on, or putting the better trees, if you will, to meet the credits that you can win. So that's what we want to encourage.
I agree that that's what we want to encourage, but I don't understand how this does that.
Well, I got to speak up again, and I've been trying to be quiet. This gentleman is our stormwater expert, and he's our tree and horticultural expert. He's not our planning UDO expert. And I feel sad that Matt lost his grandfather, Matt Kirkland, Planning Director Kirkland, has lost his grandfather, and he's away. But this has been sitting here since December 13th. And this is what we got sent to us. And Madam Town Clerk even recognized things in it when this was sent out last week. But we can't seem to fix the document and get commas in the right place and the wording in the right place. The thing still says draft on it, and yet down the bottom it says, please approve. This is not typical documentation and presentation and work we get from a planning director. This has been put on to have this thing drag. That's what I'm making that accusation. There's no intentions of pushing this forward.
I agree.
And something is wrong here. And it's disrespectful to the environmental committee. It's disrespectful for us. We've been here an hour and a half. And what do we have? Same document we had in December, 4 months ago. And we're expecting the stormwater guy to help us fix the legal language? you know, I recommend, if we're not going to approve this today because it's that bad, I recommend we have a special meeting next week. If we can't have a special meeting next week, let's have a special meeting the week after. And maybe within 2 weeks, we can fix the commas and get the wording proper.
Well, and Bob, I do not expect, to your point, in terms of the planning ordinance writing perspective, I don't expect Rick to be responsible for making all those edits and changes. What I would expect is that we would ask that Matt work with Rick on the items that we have, issues that we have raised and the questions that we've had and how to resolve that, to come back with us with edits of this proposal at our next month's meeting, to give them time to do that.
Well, if it's not, I don't think we should wait another month. I would like to, I don't know when I can make a motion, but I'll make it, and if I have to be delayed, I'll make it later. But I make a motion, we have a special meeting next week, after the planning director can have some time, which he deserves, but can come back and redraft and make those corrections that you folks have identified. And we can approve it next week. And if not, we were able to make housekeeping changes to the UDO, housekeeping. Move this from this page to that page, and we had special meetings for that. This is the tree ordinance, and people have been talking about trees and unsatisfied with the protection of trees, and yet we can, let's push this off till May, push it off till June. I don't see any need to. I make a motion to have a special meeting next week for the purposes of, let's recess this to a special meeting next week when we can have it and approve it.
And Madam Chair, if I can add on to, many times when you're dealing with language like this, which some of us know professionally, you get paralysis by analysis, right? You get so into the weeds that you can't see what you're trying to accomplish. And to me, if we had just sort of thrown out these articles and then just wrote what we wanted to achieve in a new format, new language, new articles, I think sometimes that's the best way to approach, or at least have a vision of outline of what it needed to look like, and then built the document around it instead of trying to plug and play into what existing language was. So that would just be my comment, that I would like to see the dream document, the dream statute or article. What would be best from a tree preservation and vegetation ordinance for us, and go from there, because it's almost too hard to piecemeal this together, to Bob's point, and come up with the product that we need to have. And if there was just a way that somebody could come up with that outline of what this should be, what it should accomplish, then I would certainly support, if we could do that by next week. I agree with Bob. Let's get together, let's do it, and let's make it happen. It's been going on too long.
I think that is, we have, in terms of agenda items, giving our planning director at least 2 weeks, and with not knowing schedules and him being out the entire week with a death in the family.
Sure.
I'm
But I'm
totally
saying, all I'm
against
saying
that.
is, if Rick and the EAC have done a lot of work on this, right? You kind of know what you want it to do, right? What's the operative, what are the things you want to accomplish? You kind of laid those out in the beginning, right? So what does the language need to be to do that? I mean, could you put that together and provide that to Matt as at least a starting point, Rick? Is that a reasonable request?
Yeah, I mean, the newer things we added was the tables, redefining the trees, some of those, how we're cutting. Now, when you get into that fee, we had lots and lots of debate about that. And I'd like to hear your viewpoints of what do you think that would, I think it'd be good for everybody if it was set on that committee. How do we do that? Do we do that with financially, or do we continue on with the education approach? How do we encourage you not to clear cut your lot on private property?
And enforce when you do.
Right, and we all know that you can't, we're gonna be able to take the trees out that's in the middle of the house, we all know that. but what are we really going to do? And that's why I had a really tough time with that myself. I mean, what do we really do? And you're exactly right. Those costs are passed on, just like all the other costs are passed on. And what is that number? For some of the builders here, maybe it's $50,000 per tree. For others, maybe it's 500. That was a really hard question to answer. Now, the only good thing I saw out of all that, we did provide a funding source to plant some trees on town property. But I'm not sure that, I think it is going to be like I said before, I think we're going to finally have to just try something and see if it's working or not. But I do think clearly what we have now is really not working.
Agreed.
Madam Chair, if
think-
I may.
yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, do you want? go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that, is that someone at the council meeting in April, I think in public comments, someone stood up, maybe someone from the Environmental Advisory Committee, and said that there's really two parts to this. One is adherence and the other is enforcement. Those are the two things that you need these articles to accomplish, right? Rules that you can adhere to and rules that we can enforce and that public can understand, as well as our business partners, the developers. So why can we not make a document that does those two things, is my challenge.
Okay, I appreciate all the discussion, but,
Well,
Terry, you had
I do
something?
have one more comment. I think that whatever fee we can agree on, what we're up against as the planning board, and we've experienced this before on some other very important, contentious, passionate items about the town, is that if that number doesn't suit the special interests of this town, at the council meeting, they're all going to be sitting on this front row staring at the council members. And our town, whether we like it or not, tends to cater to those special interests. So it's a really hard place to be in, to find something that is meaningful, yet, town council is going to approve.
But, right away, I mean, if you took all that other off, and you just said, you just had a $300 fee, and that's it. You just, I mean, there's lots of ways to think about it, so.
is there a separate fee to process the vegetation plan, or is that
No,
all wrapped into the?
all wrapped up in one.
And
That's
my
correct.
suggestion would be, if you want to start going down that road and have some funds generated for purchasing trees, that you, and of course, maybe have funds for, one of the things is staff time. And having the staff to be able, you can't have an ordinance, you might not have an ordinance that achieves what you want because you don't have the staff to administer it.
Well, exactly.
If you get, and so I would suggest that we consider having recommending a separate fee for the vegetation plan, separate from the ordinance that may accomplish what we're looking at here.
Well, and my personal observation is that, and personal experience, is that enforcement is non-existent. There is none. Drive to any house under construction on this island and see if there's tree protection up there. No, there are materials stacked on at the base of trees, there's equipment stacked at the base of trees. I just built a house, I know.
That's
So enforcement is non-existent.
Well, and I don't know that we have specific, in terms of how to protect the tree during construction, I don't know that we don't have specific standards for how to do that, so how would you?
And maybe we don't
Enforce
have
it.
the staff, maybe that's what the issue is, I'm not,
We are working on that, though. We are working on that. That was back to the point that no matter what we had planned, at the end of the day, what did you really do to the trees? You don't really have to fence them off, but you can just stay away from them. There's lots of ways to protect them. And then I will also say, I'm not exactly sure that the EAC's recommendation and your recommendation on those fees are cohesive or not. It doesn't appear to be to me.
Okay.
Madam Chair. When we start talking about incremental fees and we're talking about builders, it's not just the builders. If you're a homeowner and landowner trying to build a house, it's not the builder paying these costs, it's the individual landowner that's going to end up paying everything that we set forth, which increases the cost of production, increases everything that they're trying to do. Which is, I understand saving trees and education, but when we start tacking on fee on top of fee on top of fee, it's outrageous what it costs to build a house now, not counting the fees and permits and everything else that goes along with it. I mean, we have a fee for a water fee for every room over 4 rooms is $1,500 now. So, we had to pay, what was it? Another $4,500 on top of the $4,500 tap fee. Are we not collecting enough in the water system to justify? It's just insane what we're collecting. And it's the homeowner that's having to pay this, not the builder.
I think some of that was discussed.
And Madam Chair, it's not up to the forester to define the fee value. It's up to town council.
Right, but I,
And
but I
it's
think
not up to
again-
us.
But I think, again, the language here in the
Madam Chair,
ordinance. Sorry.
If the effort is to, raise a fee to then fund such and such, well, that's what is our intent, and that's what we should put forward, that we're trying to raise fees to fund this other thing. The town council decides the amount that will get raised, and if they even care to even do it. And so we put our best foot forward. And he should just plug a number in, say 300, for the sake of discussion. And it'll be town council. They may make it 301 or cancel it altogether. It's not our purview. And as far as should a homeowner pay for trees, that's not our discussion either. Our effort should be planning for the future of the town, which is we want to retain the keep tree canopy or not. And how, and if we should do it with a fund. Those are within our purview. The document's not ready. I don't know how long you want to allow, Madam Chair, to talk about this topic, but I think we should maybe, rather than give the planning director 2 weeks, why don't we ask the planning director to see how much time he needs so that we can have a document that's worth discussing and not disrespectful to the EAC and not disrespectful to the farm. I mean, this guy's quite a professional, well-trained and articulate in his field, but he's not a lawyer or a UDO expert.
I agree.
Motion to move this meeting to as soon as the planning director can have this in a professional fashion.
And motion dies for lack of a second. I do like to.
Did anyone ask for a second, Madam Chair?
I would second that.
I would second, easy.
Oh, we got 3 seconds.
I mean, the motion was to move the meeting. You still have another agenda item on the meeting. So,
Oh, okay, I meant recess
top-
this
this
topic.
topic.
I
table
apologize.
this.
Well,
Thank you.
Table
Table the
it, not
topic.
recess, sorry, table it.
Yes.
The appropriate motion would be,
An appropriate motion, okay.
to accomplish what you, I think.
Thank
The
you.
appropriate motion to what you want to accomplish, which as I understand it is to have Matt to take this and bring us back something in terms of,
And not take another month and not have it go on and on
well,
and on.
I don't know how long that's going to take.
That's right.
But to table
It's gonna take
this.
a good long time.
To
from what I
table
can
this
see.
until Matt can bring something
That'd be
back to
great.
us that addresses the concerns that have been expressed and work with Rick to do that. And whenever that is whenever that is.
Sure, it's already been 4 months, I'm sure they can figure out a reason to make it even another 4 months. But I'm going on record as to say, I'd like to have a special meeting this next week or the week after. Maybe this is in such bad shape, it needs another 4 months' worth of work. That would be quite interesting to find that out, too. Make a motion, can we move the, I think we have a second, you clarified, I appreciate it.
So is your motion to table until Matt can bring something
Until we can
back?
have a special
Make a
meeting.
motion, we table this topic until a later date convenient to the town manager to bring us a cleaned up document.
As soon as possible.
And we'll have a special meeting for it if he can do it before the May meeting.
Well, your motion, David, was to table it until,
Town manager can work with Rick to get this cleaned up,
manager's not
or the,
town
I'm sorry, Matt,
I'm sorry,
administrator, yeah.
Matt.
time out. I think Bob has a motion on the floor, and that's what we need to
I'll,
talk,
re-
that's what we
I'll,
need to do.
Yeah.
I'll
He has a
restate
motion.
it if I could. And somebody
you,
can
Bob.
amend my motion if they want to get the votes. I'm making a motion to table, thank you, Madam Clerk, to table this topic until we can have a special meeting as soon as possible, as in next week or the week after, whereby the planning director would have enough time to put this into a form that we could approve, and that would include your recommended changes and so forth.
I will second that motion.
All those in favor? Madam Chair?
Thank you, Bob. As soon as possible, will that motion, there's a motion to table. Lisa, this is a clerk question. In terms of when that would come back to us, as soon as possible, you mentioned a special meeting, would it have to be a special meeting per the motion, and would it have to be within the next 2 weeks?
And we'll have to check schedules, and I'm sure that answer won't be well-received, but we do have a Board of Adjustment meeting, and we have 2 council meetings next week. So we have quite a bit on our plate for the next 2 weeks, but we will do whatever we need to do. So if the motion is to have a special meeting within 2 weeks, and Mr. Kirkland is able to do that, I imagine we'll have to contact the planning board and check a date and see when he's able to do that.
So is that your motion?
Sure. I'm not going to
For the
get any
two-
better
for
than
the-
that.
for-
It'll get
for the
watered
2
down
weeks.
somehow.
I mean, you said a combination of as soon, I'm just trying to clarify as soon as possible.
Yes,
and
that's
the 2
fair,
special
fair
meetings.
enough. I think I made the point. It's not going to be until May, I'm sure. It may not even be ready then, but I'm trying.
I did have a question for Mr. Golden. When did the EAC approve these amendments to come to us? Because they tweaked them again since December, was my understanding.
I believe it was last month's meeting.
Which is when they approved sending these to the planning board.
I believe so.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clarification.
Correct.
Thank you.
I went on record as saying this was back in December, but I remember it was the meeting that Rick couldn't come to. And we talked about a bunch of topics that weren't forestry related. We talked about the legality kind of piece, basically zoning type questions versus tree questions. So maybe I'm wrong, but I believe it was in December.
Yes, sir, and then there were additional revisions by the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So Lisa, could you read the motion back to us again, please?
Yes, the motion to table this topic until they can have a special meeting as soon as possible within the next week or 2 weeks, whereby the planning director would have time to put this into a manner in which it can be approved.
So that's Bob's motion, second?
Second.
Ms. McAuliffe already seconded.
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
all we need to do is vote.
All we need to do is vote, and I would like to say that I am going to vote against this, not because I'm opposed to Matt working on that and bringing something back that we can approve in terms of what we've talked about here today, but I think putting the requirement to have a special meeting in the next 2 weeks goes too far, knowing what staff's obligations are with budget right now. So I'll be voting against it for that reason, but I support the overall concept.
Madam Chair, when Madam Clerk wrote in 2 weeks, does that mean it couldn't be within 3 weeks? Would that preclude it?
Bob, would you be amenable to a slight modification that says as soon as possible, and if not before, then at the May meeting?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Good improvement. I think we're making our point. We're gonna get it when we get it. And Madam Chair just clarified her vote. Maybe we'll get to vote.
So now so you accept that amendment second?
Seconded? Ter-
Okay, so now we're looking at no later than the next regular meeting in May. Okay. I can support that. Thank you. All in favor? It is unanimous. All right.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to make some comments. I would like to put it out here about tree protection and vegetation. I just, even in light of tabling this, I'd still like to go on the record with a few comments about it. I appreciate all the work that's been done in these text amendments that have been requested, but I still don't see improvement in protection of trees on developed property. That has long since been my concern. I think to help that process, there has to be a strong push for public education and appreciation of our tree overlay. I think that if the tree canopy project moves forward and that information is shared with the public, that would be a great benefit to our community. I think there should be owner incentives, maybe some permit fee reductions if vegetation plans are adhered to. Potentially, I saw something in one of the other municipalities that we were looking at language about tree protection bonding, that on developed properties, if trees remain after a couple of years, bonds can be released. They're all kind of creative ways to help the public with this. I think also at some point, we need to identify our grand tree, our big tree specimens on the island, and somehow figure out a way to incent protection of those trees. It's very important. And finally, I've always, even as a member of the Environmental Committee, was always a little frustrated with the fact that we're 25-year anniversary of a Tree City USA, and we very randomly post and advertise and publicize that around our community. There should be signage and making sure that people and visitors who come to our community understand how important this is to us.
And Carrie, when we used to have when we had the separate committees, the separate stormwater, separate Tree City committees, it was, once all that was merged into the EAC, but before, when we had a board that was just devoted to the Tree City requirements and that type of thing, then that had a lot more publicity. Those folks have an awful lot on their plate in trying to
Sure. So,
what they're
so
doing.
again, to your point, I know as being a member of that committee, there is a lot there, but the Tree City, you get all kind of signage and things, and I don't even see that much around our town advertising and showing that we are a Tree City USA. Finally, I think the penalties for violations must not be meaningful. I know the comment was made that there is no enforcement, but whatever the penalties are, they must not be meaningful. I've heard builders say, I'd rather just pay the fine than worry about protecting a tree. I'm very sad to hear that commentary, actually. And then I'm excited, and I hope that we move discussions forward on the tree overlay district. I was excited to hear that came up as a topic, and I hope we move that forward. So those would be my comments about tree protection and vegetation ordinances.
Yeah, you missed our discussion on that, and I appreciate that, and I have some things I would like to say as well, but I believe that we have one more item on the agenda that's citizen initiated, and I'd like for us to move forward to that at present. So, the only new business item is a proposed text amendment to the UDO in the CLD district about district dimensional requirements. Mr. Brady, if you start us off, and then Leon, we'll be glad to hear from you too.
Item 2.1 is a proposed text amendment for height regulation in the commercial low-density zoning district. Some background, the application is for a text amendment to Section 8.10 of the Unified Development Ordinance. The proposed regulation would be for dimensional standard for the CLD zoning district, and the applicant is Leon Hicks. Summary, there's 3 modifications to Section 8.10. It changes the existing dimensional standards to section 8.10.1.1. It would create a new table, section 8.10.1.2, for residential lots exceeding 0.4 acres. The table includes increased setbacks and greater allowance for building heights, which go up to 45 feet. And it would also create section 8.10.2.3 to detail standards for a new table, and 8.10.1.2, and clarifies that increased setbacks only apply to structures greater than 35 feet. Adopted plan consideration. Town of Oak Island's comprehensive land use plan is silent on building heights on the mainland. Implementing action I-121 of the comp plan encourages the town to maintain current building height limits on the island, but does not include mainland in the recommendation. Action I-116 encourages overall land use and development patterns that support the retention of Oak Island's small town character, its existing quality of development, and its family atmosphere. Action I-20 encourages the town to prepare a UDO and to consider within the UDO a simpler, more flexible, and more easily administered regulatory document, and balance the needs of new development in existing neighborhoods. CLD zoning district is approximately 2,375 acres within the town's jurisdiction. Approximately 190 parcels within the CLD that meet the 0.4 acre threshold are mostly along Long Beach Road and NC 211. The current ordinance contains height exceptions for commercial and multifamily structures. Projects over 35 feet must include increased setbacks at a ratio of 2 feet additional setback for every 1 foot increase in height to a maximum height of 55 feet. The proposed ordinance creates a height exception that is simpler than the existing height exception for commercial and multifamily development, but overall it adds another layer of complexity in evaluating development for the CLD district. In addition, it complicates existing height restrictions, which are based on special floodplain areas. Staff does not recommend approval of the proposed text amendment as drafted. The recommendation, motion to recommend town council to deny the proposed text amendment as it is inconsistent with the town of Oak Island's comprehensive land use plan, implementing action I-20, which recommends town develop a UDO that provides a simpler, more flexible, and more easily administered regulatory document, and it is not reasonable or in the public interest as it would add complexity to the UDO for citizens and staff.
Madam Chair, if I could ask,
Thank you, Brian. Yes, sir.
thank you. I just wanted to grab him before we walked away.
Yeah, I was going to say, are there any questions for,
And Mr. Golden, and I know you're just the assistant, I'm not trying to diminish your role or not, but you know, it's probably, you may not be prepared because this is kind of a surprise that Matt, our planning director's not here, but it's kind of interesting. My question to you, the recommendation is to not approve based on the added complexity, you know? And with zoning, there's, you know, it's a voluminous document, there's always another way to do something. Is it the complexity? Do you think the planning staff would be recommending that we approve this if it wasn't complexity? In other words, you know, the first thought, we could go back to the tree ordinance if you want to talk about complexity, but if you want to talk about, if it's just complexity, is there a way to simplify it? And would the height be okay if the approach that the text amendment was to simplify versus to make it more complex? And I respect if you don't really know the answer to that, and I'm okay with that.
Sure. Based on the information that was provided with this application and the table and the way that it was presented, based on that is how we formed how complex it was and how it wouldn't adhere with the UDO's recommendation for most simple for a zoning standard. So based on what was submitted is what made it complex. I'm sure there is another way to go about developing that table and making it more complex, but based on what was submitted is how this decision was reached.
Thank you,
Yes, sir.
thank you.
Anybody else have a question for
Yeah,
David?
so I'm just curious, this is a subdivision, Barnes Bluff, correct? And so how is that a CLD zoning designation?
I can
So
answer that question.
CLD, a permitted use is for single-family dwelling. It is a permitted use in there. So a rezoning did not have to take place for there to be a residential
Yeah,
development.
I can answer a question, Brady. When that area was previously by Brunswick County and subsequently by the town of Oak Island, zoned CLD. And CLD is the underlying zoning district for everything on the mainland, on the Long Beach side, except for the airport district, has some AD zoning. And Oakwood Glen, when it was annexed, was zoned R7 because that was the closest thing to our residential that Oakwood Glen had. South Harbor, including Barnes Bluff, is a PUD. And so the PUD controls still has uses that were allowed with the CLD district at the time. But yeah, it's still, it has a PUD, but it's still CLD, and yes, and the lots certainly the lots in different areas of South Harbor are different sizes and may or may not conform to the strict standards of the CLD lot size requirements now or then. But those are the kind of flexibility that you can put into a PUD. Barnes Bluff in particular has I think all of those 32 lots have the 100-foot wide lot width and those kinds of things. But yeah, the PUD is one thing, and they have their HOAs and their different requirements and regulations, and there may have been some things that were put into different parts of South Harbor in the PUD. But the amendment, because you can't just change the regulations for a piece of a district, the amendment has to affect everything in the entire CLD district, regardless of whether or not this may be motivated by a particular area or a particular subset of very few properties. Keep in mind, too, that CLD is a large portion of what we have that's not Williamson Tract out Midway Road, out in 211 intersection in Middleton. So there's quite a bit of CLD. All CLD is off the island, but I would say most of what we have on the mainland now, with the exception of Williamson Tract, is zoned CLD.
So if we approve the amendment text, it would affect that whole
It affects
area?
everything,
Everything, not just one
not
small
just one
specific?
little piece. No, it affects everything. And I think, what I understand Matt to always try to accomplish in terms of the land use plan, what it says to it, like I said, it does not address height on the mainland specifically. He tries to, and sometimes, we used to get, Bob, I know you probably remember, I don't think we've had much of that in terms of things that came through the planning board that the land use plan didn't really say one way or the other, but we always have to, and you can certainly get some overall impression from land use plan, but, in terms of your statement, you have to address specifically if it does or doesn't, or say that. And so this was what Matt felt like that the nature of this amendment request, what part of the land use plan might address that. in general. Does that answer your question, Carrie? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, anybody else have a question for Brady? Okay. Thank you, Brady. Mr. Hicks, would you like to speak to us? Thank you.
It was interesting. Let me just say, first of all, when I came up with the idea, I titled it the Height Restriction Simplification Effort in the mainland CLD communities. Currently, there are, within residential communities, you have two height restrictions. You have 35 feet if you're on, I think it's the VE zone. You have 41, no, I'll reverse that. 41 feet in the VE zone, 35 feet if you're in the AE zone. If you're trying to build a house and it happens to straddle that line, well, you can get some pretty interesting roof design on houses. So, but the 35 and 41 feet are stipulated regardless of the size of the lot. So the problem with it are currently larger homes, and most of these houses that we're talking about now, there are half acre roughly in size. And if you think about trying to build a larger home and you got a 35-foot height restriction, what that necessarily does is flatten out the roof. Now, I've looked at a lot of the science written on that, particularly after Katrina and storms like that. And one of the lessons learned out of all of this is that flat roofs are much less stable in high wind events than our houses with steeper pitches. We advocate 45-degree angle as being the optimum for a house. Well, if you've got a 4,000 square foot house and you're trying to do it within a 35-foot height restriction, you can't make that happen. Get to my notes here, I apologize. So many of the homeowners, in order to deal with this, have resorted to trying to get special variances. We see that happen a lot where people will go to the permitting office and request a height variance for their house in this situation. So that in itself, I think, presents an issue that we really just shouldn't have to deal with. From an aesthetic perspective also, the flat roofs just really don't make for an attractive house. And let me just say, when I came up with the 45-foot height restriction wasn't one that I came up with. That was in consultation with an architect. So what we're looking for is simply one standard height. You can be on the AE, you could be on the VE zone, but the bottom line is you would have one height, 45 feet. The height recommended was provided by an architect who does build a number of homes on the mainland. And talking with her, it was her comment that says, I asked her very specifically, for homes like what we're trying to build on half-acre lots or larger, what would be the ideal height? And that was the recommended. It would also greatly simplify matters for architects, builders, homeowners, and the town permitting office if you had one standard height with the stipulations as specified for lot sizes. I'm a little curious as to why this is being perceived as actually complicating the issue, but I'll understand that. I understand also there are issues here that I'm not always privy to. When you're also building homes these days, almost all modern homes are at least have 9-foot ceilings or 10-foot interior ceilings. And if you got a 2-story house and you got a 35-foot height restriction, again, you just can't get there. what you end up having to do is, well, you get some pretty interesting interior designs with people trying to achieve that. Increased heights in interior rooms, of course, we know makes sense, right? It improves your HVAC systems, your air circulation, et cetera. Also, taller ceilings in attics also have an added benefit. But going back to the storm damage, and I should have explained it, and I think it's probably simply a matter of geometry, that if you have a steeper pitch roof and you got a vertical wind, or horizontal wind, what is it, horizontal wind.
Think of the horizon. The horizon.
And you have a horizontal wind, what that does is it pushes the shingles down, or the metal roof, whichever one it is. Once you have that roof on a flatter angle, the wind gets up underneath it, and that's when you end up with most structure damage. Again, there's plenty of articles out there if you would like to check that out. So again, the proposal, again, is only applicable to larger lots. It also accommodates or includes additional setbacks, et cetera, as is the case with the current standards. You mentioned that the 55-foot height in a commercial district, and they do that and then you have to calculate how much above the 35-foot the height is in order to determine what the setbacks are. What I'm simply proposing is that you have 45-foot and a standard setback as stipulated in the table. Do you have a copy of the table?
Oh, yes, sir, we have everything in our
Thank
agenda
you.
packet. I have if I can ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am, please.
That may help clarify. So what I'm hearing by all the discussion about storm damage and flood hazard areas is that your primary concern is in the AE and VE zones. And there is the subdivision at Barnes Bluff, at least, those northern 20 lots are not in a special flood hazard area. And the bottom, from 21 to 30, the bottom 12 are in either a VE or an AE or some combination where the line crosses. We are very familiar in dealing with all of that because we have the same situation on the ocean side. But and a lot of people don't think about having VE and AE zones along the waterway, but you certainly do. There's another small strip on the other side of the bridge. I don't think there's any of that further along the waterway that's in the town
Well,
section. But my question is, if this were, and Mr. Callahan asked about something simplifying, if this were just applied to, if a 45-foot, and of course the 3541 is controlled on the island by a voter referendum. Neither you nor I nor anybody but a majority of voters at a duly called referendum can change that. That's not the case on the mainland. The council can make changes to the height. I wonder if, because of all your conversation in the narrative and application about the flood zone areas, and since Barnes Bluff is in that flood zone area, or at least the bottom half of it is, if changing the building height limits in the special flood hazard areas, which would be VE, AE, not sure that we have others, if just changing it in those flood zones, and that would pretty much limit it to the Barnes Bluff area, and the preserve Pakula's property on the other side, would that accomplish what the motivation of bringing this to us? It would leave everything else outside, outside of the flood zones at 35 for residential, and would make everything, would just change the height in the flood zones for both the VE and the AE, and make that a standard 45 because of that additional elevation that you need to, and the additional requirements for dealing with the flood hazards.
Well, thank you for the questions. First of all, a lot of what happens in Barnes Bluff, and I suspect in the other CLD, the existing table that exists, this 35-foot and 41-foot variations, the 35-foot height restriction is what's being applied to all houses, regardless of what zone it's in.
I understand that, and what I'm saying is, if that were changed on the mainland to make it all one height for the flood hazard zone, would that accomplish what you're seeking to do?
I don't think so, ma'am. I think what I'm looking for is whether you're in a flood zone or not, you should have at least a 45-foot height restriction if you're building a larger home on a larger lot, because you still have the same issues of if you have underground parking, you want to put 9 or 10-foot interior ceilings in a house, and you're capped at a 35-foot height, it necessarily flattens out your roof. And you don't get the attic space and all the benefits such as HVAC, et cetera, that go along with that. And I hesitate to say it, but I'll go ahead and add this, that the original approach coming forward on this was basically to be very specific in the Barnes Bluff neighborhood, but it was consultation with the planning department that said it ought to be the CLD. So we've had a very iterative process going back and forth, and again, I hesitate to say it, but I'm a little bit surprised that after all of the discussions to come in at this juncture and find out there's an issue. And I'll just recommend that future interactions with the planning office, if it's going to be iterative, and we should already have those issues ironed out, and if there's a problem in here, have it dealt with before it comes to you. That's where I'm at, but maybe I'm being a little bit pejorative here. I apologize for it. I don't want to let me just add, they've been very cordial, and we've had a very decent relationship in working the wording and those kinds of things as we work through the proposal. But I will say I just felt blindsided by the final assessment, so.
Well, and since Matt wrote that, he's not here to address that, and so we'll leave that as it is. But again, in terms of dealing with the height, to specifically change it for Barnes Bluff, you'd have to have another zone. I mean, it's underlying zoning district is CLD, and so that is something that applies in the district standards and with the addition of the flood zones. And so you can't just say, well, we're going to do it in Barnes Bluff, but we're not going to do it
And I understand that.
across the street. And so that's where that came from. But I appreciate the clarification that your interest was in, started out with Barnes Bluff. I don't know of, and if you're looking to make that applicable in Barnes Bluff, whether it's in a flood zone or not, then that rules out some, either, changing the AEVE zone height is not going, although it would be in that district, it's not going to affect any other properties in the CLD district, except, like I said, on the other side of the bridge, and that doesn't seem to be an issue. But if you want more, if you want something beyond that, I don't think conditional zoning would help you, because you're close to the acreage, and I wouldn't do that, but there's a requirement in, if the original property is in CLD, then conditional zoning has to retain it, can't use more than 25% residential property. So I'm sitting here trying to think of, knowing that you want the entirety of Barnes Bluff, and I see where you may have had an iterative process with the planning staff, because short of making it applicable to the entire CLD district, if it's more than just the flood zone areas you're concerned with,
Well, yes,
I
ma'am.
don't see a way of doing it.
Yes, I think it's, again, given the size of the lots as are specified in the table, and the idea that you would have a standard, single standard height, that on the mainland only seems to me to be a much simpler rules-based regulation to enforce than the way the standards are currently written. I guess
35 is
that's,
pretty easy to, pretty easy to do, but, I believe in the memo, there were 190 parcels within CLD that meet the parcel size threshold on the larger lots. Of course, a lot of those are commercial. And the commercial's limited to 35 feet.
so I
Unless it
guess
meets one of
it
those
always just
special.
begs the question, sort of, what is the downside? And of just increasing the height and having a standard height throughout the CLD, regardless of whether you're VE, AE, wherever your lot is, as long as you meet the standards as established in the table, have a standard height. That's really what the issue's about. And it always comes back to the safety issue. I mean, is it for a height which, if I understand correctly, the 35 feet is really, is based on the standard as established here on the island. Whereas, but that standard is also being applied to the mainland. I understand there are reasonable, there's good consideration to apply a height restriction as established here on the island. But on the mainland side of the equation, for those 190, if you can create a safer situation and a more pleasing aesthetic, that's what we're proposing.
Well, and the zoning districts have we've had that annex property over there since 2001.
I'm sorry?
I mean, the town has had property on the mainland. I think specifically South Harbor was annexed in 2001, but there were portions of the property over there that came into the town right after we consolidated. And those decisions about heights were made then. And to be consistent on residential, height has been a very sensitive issue in this town over
Well, I
the
understand.
course of our history. But I was just trying to clarify, trying to help you to get something that just addressed your smaller area rather than everything, and I think we've gone through the process of deciding that that's not possible.
Mr. Hicks, I have some
Anybody have any
questions.
questions? Yeah.
I have questions. So in the current community, which is a lovely community, wish I could afford to live there, it's beautiful. But how many homes in the existing developed homes, how many, aren't they all under the 41 and 35-foot requirement? Aren't they met, haven't they met those, or are they under some variance? Do you know that information?
I believe, I'd hesitate to answer because some of the houses were built, mine included, before it was annexed, and I believe we were operating under 45 foot. I think that's what, again, please don't take this as gospel, but I believe that was what Brunswick County was operating under.
So you have homes there currently that are at the 45-foot height level already, is what you're saying?
I would say they would be very close to it, if not at that point.
Okay, and,
That would have been
and
pre-O'Connor.
and currently, I know there are some homes under construction there, and there's a lot of fill going in. So how does that, if you're on the water side, for lack of a better term, how would having higher homes next to the water affect the people on the, I call it the hillside of Barnes Bluff? I mean, from a neighborhood consistency perspective, does that put things out of balance, that you've got houses much taller next to the water than the people across the street, from a consistency of characteristic in the neighborhood? Does my question make sense?
Yes, ma'am, it does. We have one house currently under construction, which again is under the 35 feet guidelines. The houses on the other side of the street, and again, I'm not speaking as a official on any of this. If they fill the lot, and then which brings them out of the flood zone link, then they become subject to the 35-foot height restriction. That if you have a house, again, as I mentioned, that straddles it, and you haven't filled underneath it, then technically, I think part of the house, now I'll look over my shoulder here to make sure I'm not misspeaking on this. Part of the house could be 41 feet, the other half could be 35. But all of these houses have, I'll just have to mention, have underground parking, under the house parking, I'm sorry. So that also accentuates the issues here. But so to answer your question, if you have a fill, then you're building to 35 feet. Now, the hill itself, if you put the place, and that really gets down a lot to the homeowner. If the homeowner opts to build on top of the house, any additional height added to the buildings along the water won't be a problem.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, it will add the additional 5 or 10 feet to the house across the street, but if you're on top of the hill, that's not going to be a significant impact.
And then on our west end of the island, we have the same, our homes here have the same issue, correct? Wouldn't they have the same architectural challenges as what this neighborhood is facing? But yet they're able to comply with the 41 and 35-foot heights? Is that not correct?
That's correct.
So we're complying with that architecturally on the island. So why is it different for you?
Well,
Roof
again-
line, et cetera.
Yes, ma'am. The point again is, the greater the pitch, the better the roof line. I mean, it really gets down to if it's a much safer design in high wind events. And aesthetically, again. And also, now, I don't know what they're doing on the interior rooms of those homes. Excuse me. Are they building 10-foot ceilings interior, or are they restricted to 8 or less?
I would imagine.
So, again, most modern homes being built will have 9, 10-foot or even higher ceilings on the interior. So there's a real added benefit to that for the homeowner.
It just seems, as from a consistency perspective, if we have people oceanfront here, I specifically refer to the West End, and they're able to comply without having an issue architecturally. I'm just struggling with why it's different for you in your community.
Can I expand on that?
Sure.
He's talking about the flat roof and the high wind events, and because the roofs are flat, it gets under the shingles and under the underpinning and can tear the roof off a whole lot easier than if it was at a slope. All the houses we have on the west end that you're talking about have flat roofs. That's how they're able to get the 41 and still get the interior space that they're looking for.
Yeah,
I guess how you define a flat roof is different for me.
They have no pitch.
It's the lower pitch,
It's a flattened off pitch.
flatter pitch.
yeah. Actually, hip roofs, from the research that Coastal Studies and Sea Grant have done, have the best wind resistance, but that's a whole nother issue. But I see your point, Carrie, about, and the, it all has to meet the wind standards,
Right,
engineered wind
exactly.
standards. So regardless of what the pitch is, it's designed to meet a certain wind code, which has to be met in Barnes Bluff, same as it is in Kings Landing. Other questions from anybody? Bob?
I do, for Mr. Hicks. So you said you're confused, and I'm a bit confused as well. And maybe, you know, you'd like to piggyback onto our other special meeting and table this until we have our planning director here. But hear me out first. Just like Kerry McCullough said, you know, in a an island lot, we have the same kind of dimensions as you have here in CLD. And as David explained, you know, and you were talking about the issue of a flatter roof versus a 45-degree angle, the little triangle roof versus sort of a flatter roof. And the reason people have the flatter roofs is so they can get as much development underneath them. And so we have development height restrictions, and people are maximizing those by flattening out the roof. When I say maximizing, they're maximizing the living space by flattening the roof. Now, if this was a design issue, right? If this was a design issue or even a safety issue, one might say, well, we'll allow a triangle roof, but not more living space. If we allow, what some people would think is that if we allowed 4 more feet in the 41 foot and 10 more feet in the 35 feet, people will still build flat roof houses, they'll just build bigger houses.
Thank you for
And
making that point for me.
most people, most people on the island, and who am I to say what most is, but I'll say it, right? Most people on the island are complaining about the density. You know, this is the largest growth county, and we're the largest growth, or close to being the largest growth within the county. And people are complaining about the density and the size of houses in quote-unquote mega houses and mega hotels. And this planning board voted, I think unanimously, possibly, to limit those size of houses. Now, so that's where you're getting some opposition. That's number one. One would argue if you really just need 4 more feet to put a 45-degree angle triangle roof, then the 35-foot house only needs 4 feet too. I mean, I'm not a builder, but I'm just using linear math there. So, but in any case, when people come here like you are with this kind of petition, we don't really know the motivation. But sometimes the motivation is for just their backyard, you know? Like we had people that wanted to do an accessory building, and they wanted to do it a certain way, but in the way they wanted to do it, they ended up trying to change the zoning for the entire island. I'm probably exaggerating there. And so if you're advocating changing the zoning for all of CLD, that's one thing. And we do allow you to go up higher in the CLDs with, up to 55 if you can meet different setbacks and so forth. What I'm basically getting at is what are you really trying to do? And that may be none of my business, but the approach here is to change all of CLD. And I think what Madam Chair was trying to do, she'll correct me in a minute, that she was trying to say, well, if you just wanted to do the larger homes that are in Barnes Bluff, there's a different way to do that. Conditional zoning, it used to be a PUD, I think, right? Isn't that what you said?
But I don't think Barnes Bluff still meets any of the things to try and do just Barnes Bluff,
Okay, and that may be why,
which is why you got this.
and that may be why we're trying to change all of CLD and add 4 feet to one type of house and 10 feet to another type of house. Unless there's further restrictions, if this was really a safety issue, an architectural engineering and safety issue, or even an aesthetic issue, it should have language in there that this is for a 45-degree angle roof and only for that, and you can't add more living spaces. Most people on Oak Island, and again, here I am quoting that line, they're used to seeing underground parking, or I should say, under the building parking, and then 2 living spaces. But we've got homes now that have 3 living floors. So they squeeze an extra floor in there. So I think you have to duck your head when you go in if you're kind of tall. So they're squeezing 3 floors on the beachfront, and you know how that's going to go, right? These are trends, and it's going to go past the beachfront, and it increases the density on the island, and that's not what people are looking for. So I'm basically trying to ask you if maybe you want to wait till Matt Kirkland comes back, or are you trying to should change all of the CLD district? Because I think that's a pretty aggressive change versus maybe to adjust something for the homes that are, the homes on, and the other thing, if you continue with what I'm saying, you say, well, changing Barnes Bluff, that's kind of like spot zoning. Well, it's not really, because that's rather sizable development. Those homes are unique in that area and that they're larger. They also have the waterfront issues.
The subdivision has 24.94 acres in it.
Yeah,
It has 32 lots. It has some unique features. Correct.
Exactly. It's not uniform or not uniform like all of CLD.
Well, if I can respond again, my motivation was, let's just make it simple.
Right.
Really. That was the real motivation. I have no personal interest in this. Like I said, my house is already built. I work with a lot of people who are trying to build homes under these height restrictions, and it's created a lot of headaches for them. I did not include the optimum being a 45-degree pitch, which perhaps I should have in this proposal. I realize, and again, I understand that the island itself is already built out for the most part, and some people have managed to work within the 35 feet or 41 feet height restrictions, depending on where they are. My goal was, again, and it's pure motivation, was simply, why are we having to deal with the complexities and the issues that arise from a height restriction? And I'm assuming it wasn't arbitrarily set at 35 feet. I assume that this was something that has evolved over a period of time, and everybody decided, well, the average house in the island is 35 feet, so let's cap it at 35 feet. I know there are other motivations so that you wouldn't have mega houses that turn into mini hotels, et cetera. We're not interested in the residential areas. And again, in our lots on the mainland, as you mentioned, 190 of them are, I have to say, are considerably larger than what you have on the island. Is that true? I would expect that there are very few half-acre lots on the island. So given the size of the lot, the size of the houses, and increasing the height accordingly in order to achieve both the aesthetics and the safety issues that come along with an increase. And that's strictly the motivation. It's not, there's no ulterior motive here. It just seemed to me that it would be a whole lot simpler when people build a house that they know that they can get everything they need under the roof that they desire in terms of the height of their ceiling, interior ceilings, a height beneath the house in order to park the cars, et cetera, and not end up with essentially a flatter roof. I mean, that's, we have people that are always asking the permit office for special variances and things like that. And I said, well, why are we doing that? I mean, how effective is that to do this? So, and if there are 190 lots out there that, and are those built upon or open?
It doesn't state, it's just 190 parcels within CLD
Qualify,
that meet
yeah.
the 4.4
So-
acres.
So whether, I don't know that the change I'm requesting would have a huge impact overall on the whole CLD, just those obviously that still don't have, or perhaps remodeling of homes. So,
Well, and some of those parcels could be, just because they're larger than 4/10 of an acre, they could be several acres and could be subdivided into some of these quarter acre or 4/10 of an acre lots. I mean, yeah, we don't have the details on that information, but that's just to give us an idea of, since it does apply, has to apply to the entire district,
so I
how,
guess that.
what, you know, how many properties might that affect? And of course, things can be subdivided and re-subdivided and combined and done again, so.
But they still would have to meet the setbacks.
Yeah.
In order to achieve the, I mean,
I have one question about the setbacks, but I wanted to see if anybody else had any other
I just
questions
had one
first.
last. Well, I assume one last, but why does this then apply to just houses that are on a larger lot and not all lots? If it's a safety roof issue,
setbacks in order to accommodate, I'm not sure I know how to answer your question. I think that if I were in charge of establishing home designs, regardless of the size, you should be promoting the idea of steeper pitched roofs over flatter ones, regardless of the size of the house. But my point being here is that if you have a larger home and obviously your distance are wider and you're restricted to 35 feet, your fruit obviously is going to be a lot flatter than it should be.
right, I mean, maybe, Madam Chair, you're gonna go somewhere with this, and I don't really know where we're gonna go with it, but, you know, if this were an engineering issue or aesthetic issue to preserve the look and feel of the island, then, you know.
Mainland, sir. This is mainland.
And then maybe, in the mainland, I apologize, when I said the island, I meant Oak Island, the Oak Island. So, you know, I think the other, what Mr. Hicks just brought up would be, if you have a larger lot, then you can assume more height because you can have a bigger setback, and there's some argument to that. But there's nothing in here that would require people to take advantage of that extra footage with a roof, not just more living space and a bigger house, which is back to the density issue. So, you know, if you needed an answer on this, maybe you'll force a vote. If you wanted to get more discussion in this, then I don't know, Madam Chair, I look to you for leadership.
Well, thank you, Bob. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
I've got one question.
Yes.
And I just don't know the reasoning behind, and I think it may have been talked about. Why exactly do we have the 35 foot and not 41 over the whole area?
Well, the 35-foot was in place both in Long Beach and Yopon from the get-go, almost. Certainly from the first, Long Beach had their first subdivision ordinance was put in place in General Land Use Code, 1975, so it goes back a while. And the 35 feet has been maintained since, and the setbacks and whatnot, and how that impacts not only the appearance and atmosphere of the town. And it was 35 on the beach as well, through the first several flood zone maps. What happened in the 91, what happened in 91, all of the base flood elevations across the board were in whatever they were previously in 86, they were increased 6 feet. And so the 41 foot comes from, and we had in place at the time the requirement about having a voter referendum, and we had a referendum then about increasing it in the V zone to 41 feet, so that whatever anybody could get in 35 feet, they could get in 41 feet, because they had to lose that 6 feet on the elevation.
So in all practicality, this is a moot point because it's a voter referendum.
On the mainland, on the island.
On the
it is.
island.
It's not on the mainland.
It's not on the mainland. So if
Council
we,
can do what they want to on the mainland in terms of
the height,
in the height, correct. Correct. Because if that wasn't possible, this wouldn't be in front of us. Yeah, my question, Mr. Hicks, if everybody else good? My question, Mr. Hicks, because of the static nature of it refers to the static nature of the setbacks that are proposed. And so it's just regardless of, where anything over 35 feet. So if I had 36 feet, I need to be 30, 15, 30. If I had 45 feet, I'd need to be 30, 15, 30. The setbacks be the same, anything over 35 feet, as I'm reading this. And rather than something graduated, which I can understand, that's more, what you have is simpler perhaps to some people than what we do with the commercial area to get the additional footage. But I was also under the impression that there weren't in a lot of the covenants in South Harbor, you didn't establish setbacks except for a minimum distance, I think 10 feet or so, because you wanted flexibility with the setbacks for view and other considerations when the architectural boards are considering the plans.
The setbacks in Barnes Bluff are 15 feet on sides and 40 feet from the road. Now, that's, of course, governed by the HOA.
Right, that's not
And
part of
the
it.
ARB can make variances depending on structure requirements, et cetera. But the 15 and 40 is the standard. And so it really wasn't done so much with view in mind, but just reasonable separation between homes. So they weren't quite so crowded. And again, thinking in terms of fire safety, et cetera.
Right.
So greater distances apart like that.
Okay.
And I understand too, commercially, why you would necessarily have, if you're going to go as high as 55 feet, you obviously need a sliding scale on setbacks, but again, we're just looking for a standard 45, so.
Right.
I see on your table 8-10-1-2, though, your front yard setback has been decreased to 30 feet. Is that right?
Well, again, that was in thinking in terms, since we're not just talking Barnes Bluff, but the entire CLD. So that's, but again, all of those things, assuming that there are other HOAs, they would have flexibility to set that whatever they wanted. But 30 seemed to be a reasonable setback, but it was, that was largely done, though, in accommodating the fact that it's a much broader community than just ours, and other people may have other needs.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hicks.
I appreciate everybody's time.
We appreciate you, we appreciate your time as well, and we appreciate your patience in waiting through our discussion on our first agenda item today. Is there a motion?
Well, I mean, I'll make a motion, you know, the planning director recommended that we deny this, and I have voted consistently, I would say, on any sweeping changes, and we're going to be sweeping change here to all of CLD, and encourage, and I believe our zoning ordinance is an invitation to build. And so we're going to be encouraging 45-foot height homes, and we're giving 4 feet to the VE and 10 feet to the others without requiring them to do the proper roofs or the better or the enhanced safety and so forth for the roofs. And so I can't approve that. I can't vote in favor. Now, the town planner believes that it's too complex. That's why I invite him to come back and make it more simple. If he agreed with the principle but didn't like the complexity, you know, Lord knows we've got complexity all over the place, so, you know, does he want to minimize that? Great. So, but at this time, if we're not going to table this for more input, I would not, I'd make a motion to deny consistent with the planning director's recommendation.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
I'm sort of in the same position as my colleague, Mr. Callahan. I really would like to hear the planning director's justification for this. I mean, he states that it's not consistent with our land use plan and the implementing action, but that's our standard verbiage. There's not a story that goes with it. So I would like to hear why he thinks it's the way that, you know, he's presented it.
Well, and I'd just say that in the last paragraph in the memo, requires acreage calculations, additional setbacks, height allowance be considered for residential venture, further complicates existing height limitations that are currently based on special flood hazard areas. Which actually kind of says some of the same things that Mr. Callahan said in terms of in a different way of why he can't support it, but I certainly don't speak for Matt in terms of the consistency statement piece of it.
My second to the motion is more around, I think we have a process to allow citizens to apply for a variance. I think we have a process to do that. And so if that were absent, if there was not a way for people to go and request an exception or variance, I would probably feel differently. But my objection is around the fact that citizens, builders in Barnes Bluff, homeowners have the right to go and request through our Board of Adjustment an allowance or a variance for an exception. And my other objection is, like my colleagues here is around making the change for the entire CLD zone. That's really the concern for me, candidly.
May I comment to that?
Sure.
I don't think, and I'm speaking again with impartial knowledge, I don't think you can ever request a variance over 41 feet.
Would that be true, Mr. Edwards?
not
That's not true, right? Yeah,
You can? Okay.
yeah.
You wouldn't be,
Been approved. Never mind. I'm sorry.
no.
Sorry. I shouldn't have.
No, it could,
It's a burden on the homeowner.
it could be related to the difference between the island height limits being set by a voter referendum versus not on the mainland, but still applying the same height standards to those flood zones, no matter where they are. But, yeah, I agree with Carrie that the Board of Adjustment for smaller items like that, for something that's not district-wide, for individual property owners, that's why we have a Board of Adjustment for variances. Okay. So there's a motion and second, consistent with the suggested motion in our packets. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, so motion carries to deny. Bob, myself, Terry, and Carrie voted to deny. David voted against deny. And so that will move forward to town council for a public hearing in May and a final decision on that.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you,
and,
Mr. Hicks.
I guess it just begs one last question. Do I get my $500 back?
Well, the process isn't finished yet. We just make recommendations. We don't make the final decision.
That's funny.
Very much. I appreciate your
Thank you,
time.
Mr.
Thank you.
Hicks. And Brady, I think for council, I think it might be important to explain sort of some of the board's rationale behind our agreement with the denial. It didn't necessarily agree with Matt's recommendation about complexity, but I think there are other reasons for our vote. So I just want to, if you can add that to the color that's given to the town council, I think that'll be important.
Okay.
All right. Board member reports. Mr. Callahan.
Well, thank you for letting me go first, Madam Chair. And I got to say, you did ask me to sort of be brief, and I will summarize. I will. But I do regret spending 2 hours on a planning board document regarding trees that's been around for 4 months and is still not complete. And we couldn't actually continue our discussion on it because it wasn't complete, and it wasn't just a few items that we wanted to change. Well, let's spend a lot of time on that. I have about 3 or 4 comments. My first comment is to thank town council for voting unanimously to approve and allow remote participation on boards and committees. They finally articulated that position since the COVID was over. The policy had been to restrict any remote participation. This is about openness and inclusive or inclusionary government and encouraging participation. This meeting is monthly on a Thursday at 10:30 in the morning. Many people can't do that for obvious reasons, right? But some people can, but then they can't because they have to miss one for work or such and such, or military or family issues. So we're squeezing people out, and by allowing a few remote participations when family matters or work matters call, we're encouraging openness and inclusion and participation. So I thank the town council. I did present my full comments in writing and to the clerk, so they can be included in the minutes, and you folks can read them. So I will whip through them since we wasted a lot of time here today. I first start with the urgency comments. We have a lot of things that require some urgency. That tree ordinance, in my opinion, requires urgency, and I appreciate you folks looking to hold a special meeting to accommodate that tree ordinance. We had a UDO, several UDO meetings where we had special meetings, but all we did was housekeeping. And in that housekeeping, we identified over 100 items that need attention. And those have been distilled down to 10 of Wes's top 10, and council is looking at those. And I believe we need to be working on protections in parallel with town council. We need to be urgent about that. I would recommend that we have special meetings to work on those protections. And in January of this year, I recommended that we dive into the sign ordinance. And without going into any details, that's been sort of put on hold, waiting for the Wes's top 10. It's included as one of Wes's top 10 even. So today, I'll move from the urgency comments to a substantial topic here, which is the SUP, the special use permit, okay? If you read the ordinance, it looks perfectly fine and harmless. Looks like a good way of doing government. The problem is the way it gets put into effect. And I'm not going to go into that today because we should have a special meeting, and if you read the full board report, I'm asking for your approval, I guess, that the planning director take into consideration my comments and bring together some recommendations for us to talk at the next meeting. But what I also submit to you was this table of uses, that I marked up. So I marked it up in such a way that all of the S's, we'll speak in planning board speak here, the folks at home may not follow it, but all of the S's are marked in pink. And all of the SS's are marked in yellow. So the pink ones are the most dangerous, because the way the special use permit, which has frustrated council and many of our homeowners and residents for years here, because of the way the state statutes govern special use permits. So what happens is what might look okay on paper, in effect, all of these S's are basically P's, okay? We'll talk about that next time when Matt comes back and we have time to fully discuss it. They're basically permitted because of the way the law works. And the SS's need to be reviewed as well. We need to review those S's to make sure they're okay, because state statute basically makes them a P. The SS's need to be reviewed as well, because the S's are the same as S, except they have supplemental regulations, which could be perfect. But we need to scrutinize those to make sure that those SS's are perfect and that they appropriately reflect our land use plan and the town's wishes. The critical thing, and it was horrible for me to hear while I was remote, when I listened to the Boardwalk Hotel, and my comments right now have nothing to do with the Boardwalk Hotel, because I've heard other attorneys use the same thing. And my experience back in Boston, same exact thing. The attorneys come in and what they say to you is, you should welcome our petition because you actually allow worse in your planning, in your UDO. You could have had a Publix here. You could have had a car wash, okay? And it's true. We could have had a Publix or a car wash, okay? So the S's and the SS's need to be reviewed. Sometimes we took out all that duplicate and unnecessary language during our housekeeping. That could have been some that were in those SS's. So in effect, an SS, which might look much more strong or have more protection, may have nothing in effect. So we need to go through those. My last comment, and this is really brief, although it's one page, I'm recommending that we replace a few of the table of uses with a more simplified 2 table of use lines. And the purpose here is, as we identified in our UDO audit, the town is at risk. Now, people will say, no, it's not. Okay, fine. I say it's at risk, and we're at risk of things like water parks, climbing, like zip line parks, and I'm going to say this, it's the Myrtle Beach type arcade and volcanoes and cannons and lava flying and the noise and the spectacles, if you will, the garish sort of spectacles. And so I think that we should work quickly, again, back to urgency, we should work quickly to identify what exactly we want. If we want these items, if we are inviting developers to come here and do these type of development, that's perfect. But I don't believe we are. I don't believe that's what our town wants, and I don't believe that's what the LUP, the Land Use Plan, is actually advocating. But the UDO exposes this town to these activities, and it's a real question about urgency. The tree ordinance, those protections that tree ordinance was going to give us haven't been in place for 4 months, and they won't be in place for a while. We don't know when they'll ever get in place. So trees are being cut down. And in the same vein, if somebody comes in and proposes a water park or an aerial park or a zip line or some kind of go-karts to be in our, it depends on which district you're talking about, but could be on the island, they're going to be near, people say, how about the neighborhood and so forth? This island is small. You go one street back on all of our business districts and you have people living there, okay? I was in a neighborhood, I won't say exactly where, but you might be able to figure out. And I said to somebody, wow, that smells delicious. What is that? It was the barbecue house. I didn't realize how close I was to the barbecue house, but I was in somebody's backyard and they said, that's the barbecue house. You're smelling the barbecue. Well, use that as a point of reference that just because something is in the commercial district doesn't mean it doesn't affect us and how we live here. In summary, the town is moving way too much towards a tourist and a rental, daily rental, weekly rental type of, and we are squeezing out the working families and the retirees that we have here in favor of a more tourist and more commercial and vacation rental development. And hence, these arcades and amusement centers need to be regulated. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So how does what you would like to see, Bob, differ from the regulations that we do have? And
Okay, so I can answer that, and I'll also be quick. There are two things that I'm proposing, besides the urgency comments, part of my board report. One is that we adopt adopt a few changes to the table of uses for amusements. And you've got a copy here. I think that we need to let the planning director take a look at this. He may have better ideas, and then this board can discuss it at our next meeting. So I'm proposing that. I've also proposed a land use a consistency document to go along with that. That can be, easily amended as this board, as the planning director and this board sees fit. The other thing that I'm actually recommending is that we review the special use permit, and particularly this table. I gave you all this table for you to go home and just take a look at it. I think that we need to be changing S's to SS's, maybe S's to P's, maybe S's to blanks. But we should at least validate that what is there is what we really want. Right. Picture that boardwalk location. Would we want a car wash there? It's in here as an S. We could have had a car wash there, okay? So that's, and believe me, it may sound okay, but an S is basically a P in effect, based upon the way the state statutes work. So I'd like to basically make changes to the S's and the SS's, as well as the amusement park changes.
And, that's certainly one of the things that I kept continually bringing up when the opportunity presented itself, through the audit process and at other times, that I have from the beginning had concerns about not having supplemental standards for a lot of the special uses. Although the special use permit process does still give you the opportunity to, based on the uniqueness and character of a certain site development,
Right.
other conditions, and certainly, just as an example, with the hotel, council did put several conditions on that based on the evidence that they, that was presented, and so there's, and I also am concerned about having so many different separate uses, and this seems to address some things like that, so I think we're, and I've heard the same from, I think, just about everybody else up here. So I believe we're on the same page. I think, too, that one of the overarching priority recommendations from Wes, not only the signs, but I think table of uses was part of that, too, a total reworking of that. Now, what I understand that we're waiting on is to get some direction from council on what their priorities are. But if it is consensus of planning board to ask Matt to take a look at Bob's proposals and bring something back to us at the May meeting, then that's what we'll do. David, you good with that?
Madam Chair? Sorry, continue with your polling.
Good with that? Terry?
Yes.
Bob?
Obviously, yes, I am. I want to clarify.
And I
So
am too.
you mentioned that, based on the Boardwalk Hotel, that council put some conditions on. I want to clarify. So based upon state statutes, they can't put conditions
Sure they
on. They have to agree them with the petitioner.
And the petitioner did.
Which happened. But under other hearings that are held, zoning hearings, and they can put conditions on, but not during a special use permit. Okay, so there's a huge difference, and we can talk about that later. But I didn't mean to really correct you, but I wanted to, it's not so easy, and that's what everybody in the audience those nights thought, that town council can restrict it. They really can't unless the petitioner agrees. And so that has
It
to,
has to be something that's related, there's some caveats to all that. You're
Exactly.
correct. But they could also, well, we'll let Matt bring back.
there'll be plenty of time. You asked me to be brief. There'll be plenty of time in the, in the discussion next meeting.
So we're all in agreement on that, so.
And I'll vote for
Brady, you
Natasha
got-
and Tim.
You got a copy of that? Okay. Terry, you have any?
I do. I have two things for my colleagues. The first is that on April 10th, I attended the Brunswick County Planning Board. There was a public hearing on the Castle Hayne and PD Aquifers Wellhead Protection Overlay. You may or may not know that Oak Island gets their water almost exclusively from those aquifers. There are some times in the summertime when we exceed the capacity, and so we do get water from the Cape Fear River, which is a really, really dangerous thing to have happening, given the problems that they have there. The planning board went ahead and approved the overlay. It was a little disappointing because there had been performance standards attached to that, and some, if not all of those performance standards were removed based on public comment at public meetings. Those concerns were expressed primarily from developers. So once again, not only in Oak Island, but in Brunswick County, the special interests get the ears of those making the decisions. The planning director did say that there would be a second phase where they would look at performance standards. That concerns me a little bit based on how long it's taking us to get to phase 2 of the UDO. work that needs to be done, but just a report on that. I'd like to speak just a minute about the UDO. Town council at the last meeting did ask the planning director to provide a timeline on future work on the UDO, which I was relieved to see. And staff indicated that would be forthcoming. It's my impression that Dara, our chair, is the only person allowed to speak to town council on behalf of the planning board as a representative. And I don't know if we need a consensus, or if I can ask for a consensus, but I would like to ask that our chair speak to council at the next meeting on behalf of the planning board and the urgency of these UDO items. Like so many things that have been mentioned today, I see this keep continuing to be kicked down the road at various stages, and I really would like for the council to understand that the planning board is telling them that we're not protected until we get to work on some of these items. So I don't know if you would entertain a consensus or if you would just agree to do that on request.
I've certainly done basically that very thing twice before. If you're ready for me to do it again, I certainly don't mind doing it.
We have a lady who,
It's not something I would,
Sure.
it's not something that I would just voluntarily do on my own. When I did it before, we'd had the discussion at planning board, and I was making comments to council from the planning board.
as an anecdotal note, there's a lady who comes to council meetings and she speaks about the accessibility of the beach for folks who have mobility issues. And she told me one night, she said, I'm going to continue to come and speak until they do something. And she's been here month after month after month, and she was here again last month, and she called some folks out. So if we have to go every month,
Well, and actually, the last, yeah, because Bob, you'll remember the December of '21, so,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So we're going back, December of '21, as opposed to this past December. We had the discussion about priorities, and you provided the board with a good list of
28.
items, and we added a few to those, but we all unanimously approved sending that forward to council, and I was to not only send that in written form, but to actually present it to council at the January meeting. And I was asked to be put on the agenda as a presentation to do that for, beyond the 3 minutes, and that was not done. That request was not granted. But I am happy to speak during the 3-minute period. Maybe there will be something on council's agenda in May. But I think from the conversation, and Terry, you're always there, my understanding was council was not going to be looking at giving any further direction until maybe their June meeting in terms of priorities. And so if I could ask to perhaps, if y'all want me to say something in May, that would be just that we're glad to hear, glad that some timeline has been requested, and that council has stated that we will hear some direction on priorities in June, and we are eager to move the process forward.
however you would want to do that. Maybe it's time that the planning board becomes a squeaky wheel to get some direction, to move things forward. Given the current flavor on our town council, I'm not sure we're going to make any progress on moving this forward, and I'm not sure that we're going to make any progress on the special use permit at this particular time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, could
Yes.
you addressed her comments. Could I address her comments as well? What I don't, her comments are perfectly fine, I don't disagree with them. But I don't want to give the impression, or I don't know if Terry tried to or not, but I don't want to give the impression that this board has to wait for the town council town council has a lot of things going on. And, you know, for that, we waited a long time. I shouldn't say we waited, but there was a long time before we got a response to our request in the first place. And they came back with, let's do the audit, and look at the fruit that has been, you know, produced. So I think we need to work ahead in parallel. That's what we're here for. That's our charter. I don't think, and frankly, I think that a couple of months have gone by when, you know, when it came to housekeeping, we were willing to have special meetings to discuss the UDO. Now that we're on the policy items, those are much more important. Those tattoo parlors on Oak Island can stay open till 3 o'clock in the morning. That's a minor one. We should be in there changing those things. If somebody came in with a request to open a tattoo parlor and stay open till 3 o'clock in the morning, they have the right to do so. That, I don't think, is what we want. And to say, you don't have to change that because nobody wants to do that. Remember, our ordinance, our UDO is an invitation to build. We're inviting people to come in and do that. So we can't wait for the town council to tell us to stop tattoo parlors, to wait till 3 o'clock in the morning. We have to work as a board, as we were appointed to, until August, when I'm thrown off.
Bob, I would just like to respond quickly. I don't disagree with us working on items now. My concern is that they actually make it to council.
Yes.
Karen?
To continue commentary on the UDO, I guess I was somewhat like Terry encouraged to hear the request for the timeline on what we call phase 2 of the UDO audit, that council requested a timeline. I was also encouraged that one of the council members asked for a written summary of the 10 items that Matt put forth to council as the priorities and why they were beneficial and why they were important. Because I think in defense of council, it's a lot of information, it's a lot of verbiage, and I think having something like that will summarize for them exactly these priorities and why they're important is good. I thought that was a positive thing, and I hope that can come forth, Brady, from Matt and your team very quickly. Matt did mention, I think, I watched the town council meeting, I couldn't attend, but he did mention that 3 priorities sub-priorities had already been set. I thought I understood, and that was a list given to council in some 2x2 meetings that I hadn't seen. And so, again, in working with council and the development team, I think it would be good if we could kind of coordinate. If priorities get changed or revised, I think it would have been helpful for us as a planning board to have been notified that 3 priorities had been suggested already of the 10 to council. I wasn't aware of that, although I have been traveling a little bit for work. So just that commentary, I want to encourage our chairperson to go in front of council, impress upon them the need to move these UDO revisions forward, get our policy part 2 of the audit moving forward, and continue to have that sense of urgency about moving the work forward. And then finally, I'm concerned, as are many others. Our mayor talked about this at the council meeting about the contemplated House Bill 562 before the legislature in Raleigh. I understand from Mayor White's comments that actually passed a reading on the 5th of April, which is a little frightening for me that it is moving forward through the legislature. And I very much support and encourage our council and staff to put forth the resolution or sign whatever document the League of Municipalities has put forth in objection to House Bill 562.
Yeah, the league is very actively, that is on their legislative agenda list. And let me say that there are dozens of bills in the dustbin that have passed at least 1 reading.
Okay, good to hear.
There are some that have passed 3 readings in the dustbin.
Okay, well, I hope we, as a municipality, partner with others and put forth our strong objection to passage of 562.
And as to the, you know, the report that Matt gave to council, I didn't have the same understanding of what that entailed that you expressed, and I think we need to, I am sorry that Matt was not able to be here today with his death in the family, but I think that's something that would be better to ask and bring up when he's here at our next meeting for clarification.
Okay.
Okay. David,
I am good.
you're ready to go home, aren't
Been a long meeting today.
you? Staff report. I think Lisa's gonna give us something.
I do. I'm sorry to tack this on to the end of your meeting, but I have two things. One, Ms. Carter had asked for some clean copies of some of the sections already revised in the UDO, and I have done the first two sections. I've printed out 4 copies. I can print out more if you all want one. I only printed out 4. Or I can email them to you, whatever. But I have done that for the first 2 sections. All of them now are into Municode or will be into Municode by the end of this week. So probably I'm just gonna wait for them to do the rest of them, since we're paying them to do that. But I do have these first 2 sections.
Okay.
I'd be glad to pass those out, and if you want, if I don't have enough, I'll go make another one real quick. And the other thing was, as you know, I had sent out an email to all of our advisory board members about the new policies and the code of ethics that council adopted. I have printed copies of that as well today for all of you, and there is a form for acknowledging receipt of that. So if I can pass these down, first I'll pass these down, and you can take one and pass one if you don't mind. And then I'll pass these down as well. If you'll take one and pass the rest. Thank you. Did you take one, David? Yeah. And that's all I have.
Lisa, thank you for providing this clean.
Oh,
copy.
no problem. Yeah,
The markups after. we
yes,
got
I agree, it is.
So helpful, thank you,
okay.
Lisa.
Hopefully the others will be coming shortly, and if not, then we'll do another couple, so you're not just stuck with nothing to look at.
Perfect.
Downstairs. There you go.
Appreciate it.
Oh, I have to sign a receipt.
Yeah, while y'all are signing and dating those, and that's all you have?
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody have anything else?
Just a quick question, there was a limitation on periods you could serve. Where is that actually in the document?
I'll
Because I
find
know
it.
there were some questions the council, some of the council voted against.
Planning board already had that, anyway.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me because I passed them all down, but, I think it's I think it's in the policy. Can I steal this real quick?
Okay, while y'all are signing, does anybody have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second? Gary, all in favor? It's unanimous, thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Chair.